Chapter 41, Misty Mountains Movement. If everything they had seen before could be matched to something stored in memory and thus still recognizable, the door before them defied comparison. Whether it was magic, spirits, or unbelievably refined forging, those things had all existed in this world before. But this, Gandalf studied the Hellgate for a long time, was something else entirely. "This isn't something that should exist here," he murmured. "And yet it exists, so it must be permitted. I think it's a new melody." "It's a pity I can't see inside," Gandalf added wistfully. "There's not much to see," Li Wei said at once. "Just lava, red stone, ruined structures, a few surviving creatures." If one dug deeper into the lore, the Nether itself seemed to be the skeleton of some colossal being, and the ruins were the remains of an ancient civilization. "It's a little like the deep pits of Moria." Gandalf shook his head and sighed. "Everything here has surprised me, especially that such a large territory is managed by you alone. I expected many residents inside, not merely golems." An iron golem lumbered up at that moment, curious about the rare visitor. It scratched its head and presented a small red flower. "Oh, thank you," Gandalf said, accepting it gently and tucking it away. The golem clanged off back to its patrol. "That golem is good," Li Wei said. "It can be befriended. It even gives flowers, not only to children. There are many things I have to do myself." He added that if there were truly residents in need of shelter, he wouldn't withhold help. Perhaps it was time to consider that. Unlike Falodin, who came and went in a hurry, Gandalf accepted Li Wei's invitation to stay a few extra days and took a guest room without hesitation. Gandalf's manners were impeccable. He treated Li Wei with respect and answered every question freely. Li Wei found his company natural and easy. Gandalf's knowledge and grace could rival the Lord of Rivendell, though their temperaments differed. Compared with Elrond, Gandalf was more unbuttoned, less formal. A few days slipped by. One morning, Gandalf found Li Wei. "Thank you for your hospitality, Li Wei," he said, "but I must be on my way." "All right, may your path be unobstructed." Gandalf smiled. "This has been unforgettable, especially your cooking. I'm almost reluctant to leave." "My Hobbit friend said the same," Li Wei replied. "A Hobbit friend? With your cooking, any Hobbit would welcome the chance to stay." "Well, time waits for no one. I must continue my adventures." He shouldered the dry rations Li Wei had given him and prepared to depart. "Adventure?" Li Wei asked. "Yes, adventure." Gandalf looked at Li Wei. "I have some work to do out there, and if someone is willing to come along." A moment later, Li Wei stood geared up. Dark netherite alloy armor, hidden beneath a wide linen cloak, his helmet tucked into his pack, mounted on a swift steed with a 20-speed rating and diamond-studded barding. "Where are we going?" he asked. Gandalf considered. "We're going on an adventure, not to war." "That horse, better to lead it back for now. And you do well to be as low-key as I am. It will help us move unseen in the wilds." "All right," Li Wei conceded, glancing from his own heavy gear to Gandalf's plain gray robe. The robe was perfect for travel. Practical, wind and rainproof, and unobtrusive. Li Wei, having lately grown used to going out fully armored, felt oddly insecure without the helm, but at Gandalf's insistence he stowed it away and pulled the cloak's hood up. With the hood drawn, he could pass for another wandering wizard. Netherite alloy, he knew, had a surprisingly good cut, form-fitting rather than bulky, so the armor didn't look awkward under the cloak. To any casual observer, he looked like a dust-streaked ranger. To Li Wei, perhaps more like a wandering knight. "All right?" Gandalf asked. "Fine, I can ignore the weight." Li Wei's voice was casual. Weight was a thing he could shrug off. Gandalf pointed off in a direction. "The Misty Mountains." Li Wei frowned. "Why there?" "The orcs in the Misty Mountains have been overly active lately. They've even been seen near Rivendell. They may be up to something dark, and I need to discover their intentions." Li Wei fell silent, then admitted, "I know a little about that. They might be after me. A while ago, they sent several hundred dire wolf riders to attack me. More than half were destroyed. And since then, this area has been unusually quiet. No orc bands have come near here." Gandalf studied him. "What exactly did you do to make them bear you such hatred?" Li Wei checked his reputation almost reflexively. "Misty Mountains orcs, -370. "Nothing much," he said lightly. "As I said, took out a few hundred dire wolf riders." Gandalf regarded him for a long moment. "All right, Let us suppose that explains part of it. But there's more. West of the Misty Mountains, they've been active, yes, but east of the range, they've sent scouts in large numbers. Many bastions, those ruined forts from the war between dwarves and orcs 100 years ago, have been reoccupied by orcs. I do not yet know what they intend. Gandalf's concern deepened. Then it's worth investigating. Li Wei had never traveled farther than Rivendell. Having Gandalf, someone who knew the roads of Middle-earth, as a guide felt like a rare stroke of fortune. He tightened his cloak, settled his sword, and followed Gandalf out into the morning, the misty mountains looming on the horizon. Chapter 42. Blocking the Gate. Travel and danger were nothing new to either Li Wei or Gandalf. Having only recently returned from the Nether, Li Wei found the temperate air of Middle-earth almost pleasant after the sulfur and heat. The Nether's temperatures didn't harm him physically, but that didn't mean he enjoyed them. "Which way do we go?" Li Wei asked. To cross the Misty Mountains, there were two routes, a direct mountain pass or a long detour north through Isengard. Gandalf answered without hesitation, "High Pass, it's the more direct route." Li Wei frowned. "Isn't that dangerous? I remember orcs there." "There are two routes through the High Pass," Gandalf explained. "We'll take the higher path and try to avoid them." Li Wei had only asked casually. With his current gear and supplies, among them a stack of golden apples and the wealth from the Bastion remnant, he could have fought his way out of most situations. If Gandalf had no objections, Li Wei had none. Still, the High Pass was more than orcs. Hidden deep in the mountains, beside an underground stream, something small and furtive lurked. Gollum. A flash of gold sometimes flickered in those pale eyes. They did not travel slowly. Li Wei and Gandalf walked almost constantly, pausing only to eat. Li Wei did not tire. Food kept him lively, and the old wizard's stamina matched him more closely than one might expect. Once Gandalf realized Li Wei did not need rest, he stopped mentioning it. They crossed open plains, passed the last bridge, and one bright morning arrived at the foot of the Misty Mountains. Looking up at the towering snow-capped peaks, Li Wei couldn't help but marvel. They had reached the highest range in Middle-earth. "No lingering, Li Wei," Gandalf called ahead. "We must press through High Pass while it's still light. The orcs come out at night." They began the climb early. Their steps did not stop all day. Still, caution could not prevent every surprise. A low growl cut through the air. They froze. Gandalf gripped his staff. Li Wei drew the glowing elven blade at his side. The sound did not come again immediately. They crept toward it and found, behind a boulder, 2 wargs and 5 orcs arguing over a carcass. "I found it first, so it's mine," one orc barked. "You say you found it first. Why can't it be mine?" another retorted. Gandalf whispered, "They're fighting over the kill. The wargs think they're bigger and should get the best pieces, while the orcs claim they found the prey." "Wargs and orcs bickering," Li Wei observed. "Wargs aren't just beasts. They're clever, they have a language, and they cooperate with orcs rather than serving them." "No wonder they can't be tamed," Gandalf murmured. "Unless one walks the path of evil, these brutes won't bend to you." Before they could decide whether to leave, a warg's nose twitched. It raised its head and charged. Li Wei didn't hesitate. He stepped out, helmet on, longsword flashing. The moment his blade met the warg, fire flared along the sword. The warg's fur ignited. In an instant, it was a screaming ball of flame and then a charred corpse. Gandalf watched the sword, then Li Wei, eyes narrowed but offering no aid. At first, the orcs meant to mob the lone man and show orcish strength. Seeing only one figure, they surged forward. Then they caught sight of the pitch-black armor beneath Li Wei's linen cloak and the blade that gleamed with otherworldly light. They recoiled as if struck. These signs told them this was no ordinary opponent. They should retreat and summon reinforcements. "Done," Li Wei said, sheathing his sword. "It seems our journey will be easier now," Gandalf said with unexpected relief, already planning to take it easier. "Let us go before word gets out." But dusk was falling. As they neared the end of the downhill path and were about to leave the snow-capped heights behind, an arrow hissed through the air. It struck Li Wei's breastplate and glanced off. His health bar didn't even twitch. Both turned. At the pass behind them, orcs were pouring through, a loud, clamoring host throwing scimitars and hurling arrows. "Run!" Gandalf shouted and ducked, then fled. Liwei smiled at the narrowness of the trail. I don't think so. He drew his sword. Putting on his helmet, he planted himself in the pass and held the line. With a single downward slash, he cleaved a lean orc too. The force of the blow threw others back. Weapons shattered and bones broke. Another swing swept several assailants aside, their bodies tumbling and setting nearby debris alight. Liwei stood like a living bulwark, blade flashing, armor taking blow after blow while he barely budged. Some orcs forced through his reach and swarmed him briefly, hammering at him with teeth and iron. His health dropped almost imperceptibly and then snapped back to full. The orcs' weapons, many of them netherite alloy, began to chip and dull as they struck his sword and armor. Bodies piled up. Where at first the bloodlust drove the orcs and wargs, the sight and smell of charred remains gradually took hold. Fear crept in. It's him! It's that wilderness wizard, someone shouted, an orc who'd been in the failed ambush months earlier. The cry spread. Orcs and wargs instinctively drew back, eyes fixed on the dark armor and the blazing blade. A warg, trembling, let out a bitter growl. Come on then, scum! Try to press past me! Liwei shouted back, and the force of his voice and presence steadied the mountain air. Watching the cowed assailants, Gandalf felt a jolt of déjà vu. He imagined Sauron in physical form, descending from his tower and crushing the armies of the Last Alliance, single-handed defeats of kings in the face of overwhelming odds. Seeing Liwei now, he wondered, not for the first time, who would triumph if they ever met. Thanks to Lainey Dun for the 100 coin reward. Apologies, the author's note has a strict limit. I couldn't list all the monthly pass supporters. My heartfelt thanks to everyone for your support. It keeps me writing. I'll try to update more. Chapter 43, Scheming Buzz. Deep beneath the earth, a ring trembled. My precious. A filthy hand closed around it, caressing the metal. The more powerful something is, the easier it is to blind those who possess it. They fall to temptation, and none of them end well. There has always been but one true owner. Isildur, who once bore this ring, was tempted at Mount Doom and met his end in the Golden Marshes to the south of here. The ring was lost there, or perhaps it flowed into the sea. At the foot of the mountain, Gandalf led the way, speaking of the old, weighty events that had taken place in these parts. Liwei walked behind him in silence, occasionally nodding along. You know, he said at one point, if someone had shoved him into the volcano back then, wouldn't that have made life easier for everyone later on? Gandalf glanced back. Fate has its own pattern, Liwei. The possibility you describe, no matter how many times the scene is replayed, would not occur. The threads are woven too tightly for such a change. Liwei let the remark stand. The two of them walked on, casually talking, as if the great battle they had only just survived were nothing more than a memory. They had not been able to wage a prolonged fight against the orcs. After blocking the pass, they had struck and then withdrawn. Perhaps the orcs had been too terrified, or perhaps the assault had been too sudden. In any case, the pursuit had been weak, and they had slipped away from the mountains quickly enough. Still, Gandalf felt a constant oddity about Liwei. He knew many ancient secrets that few did, yet when asked about common historical details, he sometimes claimed ignorance. It was a contradiction, and it kept Gandalf guessing. Hush, he said suddenly, holding up a hand. They halted on a plain well away from the misty mountains. From somewhere ahead came the muffled rumble of warg growls and the scrape of many feet. A swarm of orc riders thundered past in one direction. There must be an orc bastion, or at least a sizable camp ahead, Gandalf murmured, peering out. So what do we do? Charge in and rout them? Liwei asked. Gandalf shook his head. That would be reckless. It's only the two of us. Liwei, though outwardly calm, understood the danger. When sheer numbers change, even the strongest can feel a shift in balance. Then we scout first, he said. We don't know how many they have. Agreed. Following the orcs' trail under the cover of their cloaks, they came upon a camp built among the ruins of an old bastion. It was noisy and damp, far from a proper fortress, more like a temporary encampment. Orcs sprawled around, muttering, fighting over scraps. One large, imposing orc chieftain, surrounded by roughly 20 followers, oversaw the place. There are over a dozen wargs and more than 20 orcs, Gandalf observed. Look. He pointed to two orcs squabbling in the distance. One thing about orcs, unity is not among their virtues. They fight over the smallest things. Leeway nodded. We can let them chew on each other for a while and waste their strength. Gandalf plucked up a pebble, blew on it, and flicked it at a dozing orc. Who's there? The orc startled, sat up, and cursed. Dust and insults flew. Soon another orc hurled a handful of pebbles back, one striking an eye. Tempers flared, a brawl erupted. Around them, other orcs watched with the amused cruelty of their kind. I often do that, Gandalf admitted with a wry smile. Make them fight among themselves. They tire without realizing it. A clever trick, Leeway said. Just as Gandalf prepared to nudge another quarrel, Leeway rose from their hiding place. Gandalf froze, looked up, and then saw Leeway draw his longsword. The blade flashed with a cold blue light. Enemy! Leeway shouted. The camp erupted. Orcs leapt to their feet, mounting wargs and snatching up weapons. Too reckless, Gandalf grimly declared and stood, staff in hand. Well, look what we have, humans with a bright blade and a wizard. Who dares enter my territory? The chieftain barked, raising a cleaver. Kill them. The wargs lunged. Leeway swung his sword in a wide arc, cutting off a trio of mounted riders. Sparks and flame licked the wargs' dry fur. The beasts screamed, riders tumbled free. Behind Leeway, a sudden flare leapt up. Gandalf had touched the ring of fire at his finger. A smoky, hot breath swept through the camp. Anmar and the flames that had been smoldering among the ruins roared back to life, sweeping into nearby orcs. Leeway did not look back. He knew the old wizard's artifacts well enough to trust the ember-quick power Gandalf could wield. Cloaked in black, Leeway drove forward in a storm of steel, ranged attacks followed by brutal close work, carving a path through the horde. Orcs fell before him, a trail of charred, broken bodies left in his wake. Where strength could not be met, fear took hold. Many orcs tried to keep their distance. Gandalf, meanwhile, used his staff with the measured economy of a practiced hand. An orc leapt at him, and Gandalf thrust with the length of his staff to trip and send the attacker sprawling. He spun and struck another, his blow bending crude armor in a way that surprised even him. The staff felt easier to wield than before, almost as if it answered better with each motion. A half-dozen orcs closed on him, thinking to overwhelm the smaller, slower prey. Gandalf planted his staff and slammed it into the earth. For an instant, a harsh, metallic smell like gunpowder crept across the camp, and then a bright, jagged streak tore the sky above them. Several orcs, mid-attack, crumpled as if struck by some invisible shot and fell dead where they stood. Around them, the battle's tide held, uncertain and bloody, while the little fires among the ruins licked hungrily at the wrecked camp. Chapter 44. Separate Actions. Leeway, wait a moment. Leeway had already cut down dozens of orcs and more than a dozen wargs. Only the orc chieftain remained. Gandalf hurried over and looked at the last survivor. I thought you might have forgotten our purpose. Don't worry, I can control my sword. Leeway sheathed his blade. Gandalf pressed his staff against the orc chieftain's chest to keep him from rising. Their mission, of course, was to gather intelligence. You filthy creature, tell me, what are you doing gathered here? Humph. Damn wizard, the chieftain spat. You'll be flayed by us sooner or later. Thump. Gandalf struck him hard enough that the orc was left barely breathing. Tell me your purpose, and I'll give you a quick end. We will kill all humans in this area, and everything will belong to us. With those words, the orc chieftain expired. Leeway looked to Gandalf. Are there still people living nearby? Gandalf nodded slowly, frowning. As far as I know, there are some. Many years ago, before the shadows spread and the kingdom of Rovanion fell to ruin, the Black Forest was the great Greenwood. Many free peoples lived around this fertile river valley, but the forest has been corrupted. It's pitch black within. The land is dangerous and no longer fit for settlements. Most moved to safer places. Many lived here, humans and hobbits. Some left, some wander, and some couldn't leave in time and are still in the area. We have to do something, Leeway. Gandalf picked up his staff and gave the orc chieftain one more hit to prevent the body from faking death. He gestured for Leeway to prepare. Where are you going? It's not where I'm going. It's where we're going. We should warn any residents nearby and tell them to leave quickly so they don't fall into the orcs' hands. No, Gandalf. I think you going alone will be enough for that. Leeway stopped. Gandalf glanced back. What about you? I'll go wipe out the orcs. Problem solved. Li Wei's voice was casual, but Gandalf's steps faltered. If anyone else had proposed taking on a legion of raiders alone, the wizard would have knocked some sense into them with his pipe. These raiders were preparing for a large-scale plunder. They wouldn't be sending only small bands. A raiding force could number in the thousands. One man against thousands was suicide. Then again, if the orcs weren't massed together, maybe. Gandalf considered it a moment, then nodded. You have a point. Very well. We'll split up here. Be careful. Once I've finished warning the settlements, I'll come help you. May your task go smoothly. You as well. In the Anduin Valley, east of the Misty Mountains, the two separated and moved in different directions. Li Wei opened the system map. The area ahead was shrouded in unexplored fog. Perfect, he thought. Time to clear it properly. Night descended. An orc carrying a torch kicked down a fence and set fire to a line of wooden houses. Under the flames, its swollen face looked cruel and terrifying. Damn it, another abandoned village, one of them muttered. Where's the scout? Tell him to report. Didn't he say there were people here? A shorter orc shuffled up, bowing and timid. I did see firelight. Maybe they hid. Before he could finish, another scout rushed in with more definite news. The chieftain barked orders and led a handful of raiders toward the village. The ashes are still warm. There must be people nearby. Find them. As the orcs fanned out to search the houses, the wargs gave a warning cry from the shadows. The chieftain looked up. Someone in plain linen stepped out of the darkness. Aha! I found you! The orcs jeered, and the wargs lunged, ready to tear the stranger apart. Then a faint blue light shimmered, and the humans smiled slowly. The wargs who had charged were incinerated where they stood. In moments, a pile of burning orc and warg corpses marked the clearing. One of the wargs managed to break free and flee. Li Wei regretted he couldn't catch it without a mount, but he felt little remorse for the fleeing beast. Clever. It ran when it saw the light. Li Wei didn't bother tracking the single escapee. He moved on at his own pace, uncovering the map, searching for abandoned villages or isolated orc squads. He cleared one pocket after another. Days passed in a patchwork of quiet and sudden violence. On the far side of the wasteland, an escort squad responsible for transporting captured humans trudged along. They were bigger and meaner than most raiding bands. Their business was slaves, not just plunder. When a scout reported smoke from a nearby village and sighting of drying clothes in a yard, hope flared. Smoke? One house or many? The chieftain demanded. Many, more than one. Some houses are old, but they were cleaned. I saw clothes drying. Are there many weeds on the road? The chieftain asked. No, very few. I could see clearly inside. The chieftain's face split into a cruel grin. This isn't a trap. It's a real village. Tonight, we feast on human flesh. He set a small guard to watch the captives and led the rest to the houses, laughing as the horde ran toward what they expected to be an easy harvest. They tore through the village, fires still hot on some hearths, leather garments on racks, but there was not a single living soul. Confusion spread through the rank and file. Then, from the distance where the guards had been posted, a sudden eruption of flame and screams cut through the night. Orcs and wargs, engulfed in fire, were flung into the sky and fell back to the ground in silence. Under the moon, the scene was unmistakable. The slavers' small camp had been wiped out in an instant. Li Wei paused as he watched the flames die down and the map slowly clarified. He had been methodical, picking off the scattered squads that would otherwise converge into a larger force. The more he uncovered, the more the valley opened before him. Ruined villages, deserted homesteads, and the scattered bodies of raiders who had misjudged the night. He would press on. Gandalf had the warnings to carry. Li Wei would keep carving the map clean, one isolated group at a time. Chapter 45, Guidance. It had to be him, that human. Damn it, I've been tricked again! The orc chieftain, furious and humiliated, raised the cleaver in his hand and bellowed toward Li Wei. Behind him, a pack of wargs and a mass of orcs bristled, waiting for their leader's order to rush forward and tear the human to pieces. The leader spun on his heel, ready to flee, but the surrounding orcs were stunned. When they recovered, defiance burned in their eyes. Just one human, and you run? Hundreds of us. How can you be our leader, coward? A larger, heavier orc pushed forward to challenge him. Shut your mouth, scum! Want to die? I'll make it happen. The chieftain seized the dissenter with one mighty arm. lifting him clean off the ground. A hand clamped around the orc's throat, squeezing until he could hardly breathe. The fellow thrashed until the leader pummeled him to the ground with a heavy thud. He didn't kill him, only threw him down to gasp for air. The other orcs fell silent, at least outwardly obedient. "You don't know how terrifying he is," the chieftain growled. "Go fetch reinforcements. We need more to deal with him." Reluctantly, the orc horde retreated. Under the wavering firelight, the refugees' faces showed a mixture of grief and disbelief. They stared at the black-armored warrior, who seemed to have dropped from the sky, unsure whether they were dreaming. They couldn't tell if this brutal-looking fighter was a friend or an enemy. Only a few dozen poorly equipped orcs remained guarding them. Leeway dealt with them quickly. Some died, some fled. Not a single one was left alive. "Sir," an old farmer shuffled forward, steadying himself to speak. He bowed with the conviction of a man who had nothing left but pride. Leeway removed his helmet and helped the old man to his feet. Seeing that the warrior bore no hostility, indeed, was oddly kind, the refugees released a held breath. "Are you from here?" Leeway asked. "Yes, sir. We've lived here for generations," the old man answered. Leeway kicked at the fallen orc corpses twice and said, "This place isn't safe for long-term residents." The old man was at a loss. He didn't know exactly what had happened, only that orcs had descended on them, burning homes, killing and eating some, capturing others. "But we have nothing now," he said. "Our houses are gone. Where are we supposed to go? Everything we own is here." Leeway looked over the dusty, exhausted group and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Head south, follow the river, and you'll reach Rohan. South of Rohan lies Gondor. Those are human kingdoms, safe havens. If you won't head south, go east, beyond the Black Forest to the Dale. There's land and people there as well." He paused, considering the options, and added, "If things get desperate, you can cross the mountains to the west and make your way through the wastes. There's territory there that some have settled." "We'll remember, sir." The refugees accepted his directions solemnly. They asked Leeway his name, thanked him with grave bows, and prepared for the long journey ahead. Leeway took in the ragged faces and shook his head. "Take these," he said, calling them back. He handed out a large stack of bread, and with quick, practiced motions, hammered out a handful of crude iron swords for the younger, stronger men among them. It might have been a tiny thing for him, but the food and weapons could mean the difference between life and death on the road. After they left, a notification flashed in his reputation window. As these refugees found new homes, word of his deeds would spread. The more he saved, the more his renown grew. A small, unexpected bonus. Elsewhere, in a village the plunderers had not yet reached, a gray-cloaked figure argued with the locals. "But we've always lived here," someone protested. "We've never heard of any Aok army." "That's because the dwarves cleared them out once," the gray-cloaked man replied. "They're back now and nearby. If you want to live, gather your belongings and leave. There's still time." A scruffy, bearded man barged through the crowd, sneering. "We won't leave. Which?" He was a loudmouth who'd been stirring trouble for a while. Gandalf didn't hesitate. He struck the man with the staff. The fellow crumpled unconscious to the dirt. "I'll say it again. Leave now, or it will be too late." Gandalf's voice carried a power beyond mere words. The villagers found themselves listening, their fears giving way to reason. "This land feeds us," one whispered. "If we go, where will we go?" "There are other places," Gandalf said, pointing north. "Not far across the river are larger settlements, people of the same blood. Gather there. Together, you will be stronger." Gandalf knew the countryside and its history far better than most. There were settlements north of the river with organized forces, enough, if united, to resist a regional orc incursion. If the scattered people could be brought together, they could defend themselves, remain on their soil, and stop depending on strangers. Slowly, the villagers packed and argued over the safest route. Gandalf lit his pipe and drew a long, thoughtful puff. It wasn't the smoke alone that he kindled, but a small ember of hope in their hearts. To find them, to guide them, to unite them, this had always been the wizard's duty. Thanks to Wuxi Shilling for the 100 coin reward, thanks to Shangi for the 100 reading coin reward, and thanks to all readers for your recommendations and monthly votes. Thank you for your support. Chapter 46. Winter Arrives. On the swamp, Liwei stretched after clearing another small stronghold and patted his tattered linen cloak, still streaked with blood. The blue glow along his sword dimmed as the blade slid past the throat of the orc beneath his boot. Somewhere nearby, a corpse smoldered, the fire banishing a little of the morning mist. Liwei held his hand over it for warmth. The air was getting steadily colder. It had been a long time since he and Gandalf split up. At first, Liwei kept track of the days by counting sunrises and sunsets, but as the fog on his map lifted and the path he'd walked grew longer, the number of orcs he'd cut down kept mounting, and a numbness settled over him. Each day was the same. Travel to clear the map, search for orcs or refugees. He vaguely remembered finding a scattering of refugees about a month ago, speaking with them and guiding them to safety. But since then, he'd met almost no humans. Even animals were rare. Around here, only orcs and wargs moved and made noise, until now, when none of them stirred. He sat for a while, dazed, and ate 2 pieces of hard bread. Opening his map, he checked the terrain. Most of the fog over the Anduin Valley had been cleared, the region charted. One by one, he'd taken the orcs' strongholds. The remaining orcs either fled too quickly to catch or had gathered in large open gatherings of hundreds of warriors, too many for him to tackle alone. When numbers grew, tactics changed, and being trapped meant almost no chance to get away. The orc armies left were hard nuts to crack, largely forced into unity by Liwei's actions. It was time to pull back and resupply. His ready rations had long since been eaten. He'd been making bread from the small hay blocks in his pack, and now even that was almost gone. He was about to get up and search for game when a familiar voice called from the distance. "I finally found you, Liwei. Phew, that wasn't easy." A gray-robed old man pushed through the bushes, skirting the marsh, and hurried to his side. "I've been tracking you for nearly half a month. If I hadn't seen some burned orc and warg corpses, I'd have feared you'd already gone back." "How could I return so early? The orcs here aren't completely cleared yet." Liwei shook his head. Gandalf laughed and waved a hand. "Oh, come now. You've done more than enough. In the last half-month, I haven't seen a single living orc. Honestly, this is cleaner than what a dwarf host would accomplish. I'm beginning to suspect you have a deep hatred for these creatures." "Deep hatred?" Liwei glanced at his reputation bar out of habit. Misty Mountains orcs, NA 1523. He supposed he did. "Anyway, our work here is done for now. The valley's people have moved north and gathered together. If they truly unite, the orcs won't threaten them anymore." "Perhaps they'll form a new tribe," Gandalf mused. "Without your help, they'd have met many more setbacks," Liwei said. Gandalf found a broken bit of wood to sit on, produced his pipe, and lit it. A stream of smoke eased some of the tension from his face. Liwei said nothing. He watched the thin curl of smoke vanish into the gray morning. Gandalf glanced at him twice, thoughtful. After a moment's rest, he put the pipe away and slapped his knee. "Oh, I nearly forgot. What? New Year? New Year?" Liwei blinked. He'd lost track of time. This trip had been longer than any he'd ever taken, even longer than his trip to the Nether. "We should wrap this up," Gandalf said. He patted Liwei's shoulder, as if closing a chapter of their travels. A cold breeze passed, and tiny white flakes touched Liwei's face, wet and sharp. "Snow. The orcs have pulled back to around the Misty Mountains," Gandalf continued. "For some reason, they've stopped expanding outward." Gandalf's tone was almost wry. "Honestly, this is one of the rare times I feel things are going smoothly. Other adventures are usually clogged with obstacles." Liwei drifted off. "Liwei?" Gandalf called. "Here," he replied, snapping back. "You're always distant," Gandalf said. "No," Liwei answered slowly. "It's just a bit tired?" "No. You know I don't get tired." "I think you are tired," Gandalf said in the calm voice of someone who'd seen many kinds of weariness. "Listen to me. The elves live long lives and are close to nature and magic. Their bodies rarely fail them, but they can die of sorrow. The spirit, one's life and soul, needs nourishment. You mustn't ignore that, Liwei. Whether it's you or me or anyone else, everyone needs rest. When it's time to sleep, don't stay up. For us, the body isn't always the main thing, but the soul needs tending." There was no need for more words. Liwei listened and nodded. He realized he hadn't slept properly in months, not because his body was tired, but because he'd felt no fatigue. Maybe Gandalf was right. The the soul also needed maintenance, something experience points couldn't fix. Days passed. Together, they retraced their route and left the Misty Mountains. The journey down was unnervingly smooth. They saw almost no orc tracks. Even at the narrow mountain passes, no orcs came forth to harry them. Once they descended into the open, Gandalf spoke again. "As I said, I'm going to visit the Shire. You coming, Leeway?" Leeway reached out and caught a single drifting snowflake on his glove. "No, I won't go. I still have things to do." "While it's winter," Gandalf said, nodding. The cold made everything quieter, and the world felt, for a moment, like it was holding its breath. Thanks to Lei Ni Dun for the 100-point coin reward, thanks to Shu Shan Yu Dao Yu for the 500-point coin reward, and thanks to everyone who voted, recommended, and bought monthly passes. Thank you for your support. Chapter 47, Encounter in Bree Snow. In that world, it usually fell only on the high peaks of the Misty Mountains or across the far northern wastes. Elsewhere, one waited until winter. Leeway had never thought much of it. Snow itself was pretty, but not especially useful. Ice, however, especially the unmelting blue ice that could be synthesized from ordinary ice, was invaluable for building high-speed routes. In his first winter in this place, Leeway decided to stockpile materials. One day, returning from a long trip, he cleared the snow from his city gate and invited Gandalf in for a meal. The old wizard accepted, but would not stay long. "Thank you for the invitation, but I must be off. If I'm late, they'll say I'm a liar," Gandalf said with a twinkle. "All right, have a pleasant New Year," Leeway replied, seeing him off. Once Gandalf left, Leeway set to work clearing the most used parts of his territory. The thick snow was beautiful, but made movement difficult. The clearing produced a whole chest of packed snow. He hadn't been home for months. The livestock, cows, sheep, horses, were as hardy as ever. Despite the heavy snow, they showed no signs of trouble. The native animals were housed in warmed sheds, fed and comfortable. The farm, however, had suffered. All the water had frozen solid. Frozen water dried the nearby plots, and the crops had collapsed into seeds and fallen. Leeway dropped glowstones into the bottoms of ponds to supply heat and prevent freezing, then replanted the fields. "Heavy snow won't crush my frost-resistant crops," he muttered. That evening, he remembered something Gandalf had said, and for once, Leeway returned early to his room and slept like a log. He woke refreshed, different from the usual perk of a good meal. It felt like his whole state had been reset. Time to work, he thought. He hauled a large pile of materials from the warehouse and planned an ice collecting area. In his crafting, one unmelting floating ice required 9 ordinary ice blocks, and the blue ice used for high-speed roads required 9 floating ice blocks. The amount needed for even a single lane was enormous. This would be a long-term project. Leeway picked up his enchanted pickaxe, Silk Touch and Mending, and began to chip at the ice day and night. After each harvest, the water needed time to refreeze, and Leeway did not waste that waiting time. He used it to improve his territory. After shoveling once, he never wanted to shovel again, but weather could not be commanded. So he installed heat sources, torches and glowstones along frequently traveled paths to automatically melt falling snow. With light came roads. He laid down paths beneath the lamps, then decorated the sides with planted ornamental trees, flower beds, tiered benches, fences, small ponds, and delicate little streams crossed by wooden footbridges. Building, he found himself unconsciously borrowing elements from Rivendell's architecture. Roadside fort's style shifted, becoming something new. Far away, Gandalf had spent the night in the Shire putting on fireworks for the children. He delighted in their laughter, setting one burst after another into the sky until the hobbits lay awake for hours, the colors replaying in their dreams. Early the next morning, the kids gathered to ask if he would come again. Gandalf could only promise he would return someday, then he was off, following an instinctive route that seemed right to him. Spring arrived with lightning and heavy rain. On March 15th, Third Age 2941, Gandalf found himself in Bree and stopped at the Leaping Pony. Inside the inn, he glanced up and his eyes fell on a dwarf who looked haggard and hard-pressed but carried an unmistakable presence. The face seemed familiar. Gandalf's memory snapped back to a prisoner he had met almost a century before in Dol Guldur, a tortured dwarf whose memory had been shattered. That dwarf had given Gandalf a key and a map and had begged him to deliver them to his son. At the time, Gandalf had not known who that prisoner had been. Now, seeing the dwarf before him, everything clicked into place. The prisoner had been Thrain the Sixth of Durin's folk, and the dwarf in the inn was Thorin Oakenshield, his son. Thorin sat with his head bent over his food, while a few ill-disposed men in the noisy room kept glancing at him. Two of them rose slowly and began to close in on his table, like a pincer. Thorin set his plate down and slipped a hand toward his sword. A voice cut through the tension and brought an odd calm. An old man in gray had taken a seat opposite Thorin. The two would-be attackers exchanged looks and drew back to watch. "Allow me to introduce myself," the old man said. "I am Gandalf, Gandalf the Grey." "I know you," Thorin replied. He had heard of the wizard. Gandalf nodded. "What brings Thorin Oakenshield to Bree?" "I was told someone saw my father wandering near the Black Land," Thorin said. "I went searching, but I found nothing." Thrain, Gandalf sighed, the name heavy on his tongue. Fate, it seemed, had begun to play its old tune again. Chapter 48, Expedition Invitation. "Our meeting wasn't accidental, was it, Gandalf?" "Of course not. It wasn't a coincidence." Gandalf spoke slowly. "The matter of the Lonely Mountain has worried me for some time, Thorin. The dragon has been there too long. Sooner or later it will draw other dark eyes." The Lonely Mountain was a crucial defensive point. If it fell to evil hands, they could pass through it and push north, all the way to Angmar. The Witch King's realm might be rebuilt. The forces of darkness could use that route to bypass the southern defenses and extend their reach into the peaceful lands west of the Misty Mountains. Then even distant places like Lindon and the Shire would face grave danger, and Gondor and Rohan could be caught between two fires. No one would remain untouched. "I met some rude fellows on the Green Road," Gandalf continued. "They mistook me for a ranger." "I suppose their end wasn't pretty," Thorin said. Thorin knew something of a wizard's power. Gandalf nodded and drew a sturdy scrap of parchment from his robes. "I found this on them. A bounty." "A bounty for what?" "For your head. Someone wants you dead." "We cannot wait, Thorin. You are the heir of Durin's line. If you can rally the dwarf hosts, you might have the strength to reclaim Erebor." "Call the 7 clans to council and make them honor their oaths," Thorin said. He fell silent. In theory, if he could muster the dwarf armies, reclaiming the Lonely Mountain might be possible. But there was a problem. The 7 houses swore allegiance to the holder of the king's jewel, Gandalf reminded him. The king's jewel, the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain, was Smaug's prize. "Only with the Arkenstone can I gather them," Thorin said. "But have you forgotten? Smaug has had it for ages." Gandalf's eyes flicked to 2 rough men lingering nearby. He made them leave the house with a look and then said, "What if I help you get it back?" "How? It's under a dragon's foot." "Yes, that's why we need a burglar." Gandalf had a feeling the mission would require a hobbit. Small, light-footed, silent, and adept at vanishing into the background, hobbits made natural burglars. He paused, smoked his pipe, and added, "And a brave warrior, someone willing to lend muscle." He had one candidate already in mind. The plan took shape. Thorin, freshly returned from the wilds of the Black Land, and Gandalf would set out to the Blue Mountains to finalize details and recruit an expedition. Gandalf would go first. "I must find a friend," he said. "After that, we will gather in the Shire." "I will put a mark on the door," Thorin replied. Gandalf left, and soon Thorin and 12 dwarves who answered his call, fully armed, took the same road. It was the Third Age, 2941, April. Near Roadside Fort, Gandalf leaned on his staff atop a rise and looked out over the quiet, cultivated lands. He frowned and took out his pipe. "Where have I come to? Is this still Roadside Fort?" The place did not feel like a mere roadside hold. Even before he reached its walls, the greenery and the well-kept grounds suggested something more refined. On the parapet, someone waved. Gandalf raised his staff and twice tapped it in reply. On the wall, Leeway walked to the gate, pulled the lever, and waited for the wizard. From a distance where his voice could just be heard, Gandalf called, "Well met, Leeway. How have you been?" "Not bad," Leeway answered. "Well, I suppose. Time has passed strangely fast." He stood at the gate in plain clothes and a pair of netherite alloy boots enchanted with feather falling for. To the casual eye, he looked like a simple townsman, aside from a phantom ache in his liver that no one could see. Approaching the gate, Gandalf's gaze wandered beyond Leeway to the scenery inside. Is this still the wilds of Eriador? I almost thought I'd arrived in Rivendell. Leeway smiled. Thank you. I took some inspiration from Rivendell. Minor renovations? Gandalf raised an eyebrow. You have a way with understatement. Leeway welcomed him inside. After a short rest, he cooked a few dishes, and they sat to eat. Gandalf took in the layout, the terraces, the tidy groves. You've been busy these last months, he said. I have, Leeway agreed. His steady work and planning had turned the place into something managed and coherent, no longer a scatter of isolated features. Gandalf peered out the window. Everything here is fine. The only pity is how quiet it is. Aside from you, there's almost no one. You might also want to smooth the corners of some buildings, Gandalf said idly. They look handsome, but they are sharp, and someone could get hurt. And that big pool over there, he added. I hope you won't mind my bluntness, but it seems out of place. Leeway laughed. Useful suggestions. That out-of-place thing is actually an ice harvesting field. I use it to collect ice in winter. Spring came too suddenly this year. I've not had time to dismantle it. Ice harvesting? Gandalf blinked. He was puzzled for a moment, then smiled. It was Leeway. Of course it made a kind of sense. Their meal was leisurely. Gandalf spoke of his travels north of the Shire and of the ruffians on the Green Road and of the scattered rangers there. Ranger, Leeway mused, then asked, Do you know a ranger named Faladon? I haven't seen him since we parted. No, Gandalf said. He knew many folk, but not everyone. I don't, but I can ask. If I hear anything, I'll tell you. No need, Leeway waved the idea off. I only ask because you mentioned rangers. With his skill, I hope nothing untoward has happened. I hope so too. Gandalf finished his last piece of meat, set down his fork, and looked up. Actually, I came to ask if you would be interested in joining an expedition. An expedition? Leeway's eyes sharpened. He had a sense of timing. A wizard did not visit without purpose. Tell me more. Chapter 49, The Feast. The expedition, of course, meant the Erebor expedition. Gandalf soon told Leeway about his encounter with Thorin in Bree and about his plans and worries concerning Erebor in the north, as if it didn't matter whether Leeway understood every detail. He treated Leeway like one of his own, confiding everything. Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thrain, heir to the kingship of Durin's folk, has gathered a company of dwarves in the Blue Mountains and is on his way here. We will meet at the Prancing Pony and travel together to Erebor to recover the Arkenstone, Gandalf said. With the Arkenstone, Thorin could rally the dwarves and launch a full-scale assault on the Fell Dragon to reclaim their homeland. That plan sounds reasonable, Leeway said simply. That was indeed the plan, although history would show its flaws. Gandalf nodded and continued, If you've not heard, the hordes in the halls of Erebor pile up like mountains. If you help the dwarves reclaim their home, 1/15 of their recovered treasure will be your reward. Gandalf had watched Leeway and knew that, while he often acted like a free fighter against evil for its own sake, Leeway also had needs, land to govern and people who might one day depend on him. A reward made sense. Gandalf, for his part, never counted himself among such bargains. Hindering a great evil was reward enough. I agree to join, Leeway said. At last, Gandalf exhaled as if a weight had been lifted. With Leeway's formidable strength, the expedition would be far safer. Then it is settled. Gandalf hurried to finalize the arrangements, not wanting Leeway to change his mind. On the evening of April 25th, we will gather at Bag End in Hobbiton. Don't worry about finding it. I'll leave a mark on the door. There will be a feast, Leeway added. All right, noted, Gandalf replied, glancing as if he had already informed the others. Leeway felt a faint sympathy for poor Bilbo. His honest, orderly hobbit friend was in for a rough few days. Gandalf, however, seemed oddly fond of the tookish hobbit and could not resist making the call. While Gandalf went on his way, Leeway packed. He cleared building materials from his warehouse to make room, gathered supplies and medicines, golden apples, various potions, lembas, stacks of preserved food, and hay bales to sustain a long journey, then armor, weapons, tools, arrows, and other necessities and emergency gear. Before long, his pack was nearly full. After one last tidy of his territory and 2 days waiting, Leeway set off by horse, though he took care not to go too fast. arriving well before Gandalf might be awkward. A few days passed. One bright morning in Hobbiton, Bilbo stood at his door with his pipe when a tall, strange old man greeted him. "Good morning," the man said. Bilbo blinked. "Do you mean that you wish me a good morning, or that it is a good morning, whether I wish it or not? Or perhaps you're feeling particularly good this morning?" The stranger's eyes twinkled. "All of those, I suppose." Bilbo found him increasingly odd, turning up on his doorstep, disrupting the peace, and then playing with words. He hoped they had nothing to do with one another. "I am looking for someone to share in an adventure." Bilbo's ears pricked up for a moment. Adventure? The man fascinated him. Then he remembered his own peaceful life. "I see no one west of Bree who likes adventures. You've come to the wrong place," Bilbo said. "However, I do have a friend who is a very good cook and who truly loves adventures, though it certainly isn't me. I'll ask him next time. Yes, that will do." The stranger smiled. Bilbo muttered, "Good morning" again, and moved to close the door, only for the stranger to add, "You know me, but the name in your head hasn't matched mine. I am Gandalf, Bilbo Baggins. You've changed, a great deal. You were not like this when you were a child." "Well then, it's settled," Gandalf said as if Bilbo had agreed. With a clang and some tugging, Gandalf was shut out, and Bilbo locked his door to keep him from pestering him further. Bilbo listened for a while and heard something odd. Outside, Gandalf's staff traced a mark on the door, a sign to guide the others to Bag End. Bilbo's peace, it seemed, would endure only a day. That evening, just as Bilbo was frying a fish for himself, there was a knock. A large, bearded dwarf filled the doorway. "Dwalin, at your service." "Ah, Bilbo Baggins, at your service," Bilbo stammered, straightening quickly. Dwalin helped himself to the meal Bilbo had prepared. "I didn't expect anyone to come today." More knocking. "Balin, at your service." Then in quick succession, "Fili and Kili, at your service." Bilbo's house rapidly filled. In the bustle, a chest, his mother's dowry chest, suffered the indignity of becoming a convenient seat and even having its lid used to wipe boots. "Please don't," Bilbo protested as a sword was drawn and swished twice in the air. "That was given to me by Li Wei. Please put it back." "Li Wei sounds familiar," one of the dwarves said. Another knock. Bilbo opened the door again, and a wave of dwarves surging into his home left him speechless. Gandalf, peering in, smiled. The night became a live, loud feast. Jokes were made, songs were sung, and as the larder emptied, Bilbo's nerves frayed. The dwarves even composed a boisterous song that made him feel smothered. "There's still one missing, our leader," someone said. "No, two. He hasn't come either." Gandalf kept looking out the window. They all wondered if he would arrive. The doorbell, knock that is, sounded again. "Thorin," someone announced as the heavy tread came. "Gandalf, you said this place is easy to find," Thorin grumbled as he stepped in. Soon, dwarves, hobbits, and the wizard sat around Bilbo's table discussing the expedition. Even if they expected Li Wei, the plans flowed on. Gandalf took his part in the planning. Conversation paused, however, when the knock came again. Everyone looked at Bilbo, and he, resigned, opened the door. A figure in black stepped into the doorway. His armor was dark, his linen cloak tattered and stained with blood, and a faint metallic tang hung about him. When he entered, the light in the room seemed to dim around his presence. Some dwarves reached for stools, others for weapons. A few who found neither grabbed a nearby dining fork. Guardianship instincts flared. Everyone went on edge. But Bilbo's face lit up with unexpected delight. "Li Wei!" he cried, arms opening wide. A smile, perhaps the warmest of the evening, spread across his face. "Oh, this is the happiest thing today. Welcome, welcome. I didn't expect you to come." Bilbo turned to introduce the newcomers, then froze as he took in the tension behind him. "What are you doing?" he began, startled all over again. "Thanks to Dao Yu of Shushan for the 1,000 coin reward, and thanks to everyone who voted and supported me. P.S. I thought it might be better to post 2 chapters together. Sorry if that's inconvenient. I'll post earlier next time if needed." Some readers asked why I didn't develop the domain earlier. There was too little time before the Erebor expedition. If I had tried to expand the domain then and still join the expedition, development would have stalled, and the territory would have been left leaderless during the journey, creating a jarring discontinuity. After the expedition, Li Wei will gain prestige and influence and make many allies among the free peoples, which will greatly help in developing the territory. Everything that should be there will be there. Don't worry, the domain's development will not suffer. Chapter 50. Joining. All right, put down your weapons. Gandalf moved through the crowded room, quieting the dwarves one by one as if they were children. This is our companion. Bomber, Dwalin, forks and spoons are not swords and shields. Bofer, put down your flute, that won't pierce his armor. The tension eased little by little. Thorin, the stoniest of them all, said nothing at first. He simply stared at Li Wei, refusing to take his eyes off him. Thorin recognized the scent clinging to the newcomer, orc blood. Is he the capable man you spoke of, Gandalf? He asked. He'll be of great use on our journey. I give you my word, Gandalf answered. Li Wei greeted Bilbo first, then inclined his head toward Thorin. Good day. Thorin peered at him, as if trying to place a remembered face. We have met before. Yes, I once traveled to the Blue Mountains. I recall meeting you in the Hall's workshop. Another dwarf piped up. A human who stayed at the inn by the entrance a few months back. Could that be you? Li Wei smiled and nodded, greeting the assembled dwarves. Then a different voice cut in. I heard that a human traveler drank a dwarf under the table that night. The hall erupted in disbelief. A human outdrank a dwarf? Don't be ridiculous. Hush, no, many were there. It's true. I won't believe it unless he drinks with me, someone challenged, and the dwarves started to jeer and shout, half teasing, half serious. Gandalf stepped between them, hands raised, and the chaos settled. You smell strongly of blood, Li Wei. Did you meet any danger on the road? He asked. Li Wei nodded. Not exactly danger. I ran into some foolish wargs and orcs. The dwarves exchanged looks. They would dare attack you? One scoffed. The Anduin Valley was far from the Blue Mountains. News hadn't had time to spread. Li Wei's actions, however, would travel. They were different from the others I'd met. They were well-equipped, organized. Someone was leading them. Someone bold. Still, I killed them all. Their wargs ran fast, but my horse ran faster. Gandalf only nodded at the plain statement. The dwarves whispered among themselves. Some thought Li Wei boastful. Others were intrigued. Bilbo, who had no idea what orcs and wargs were, listened wide-eyed and simply noted, these people had stories unlike anything he'd known. Bilbo fetched a stool and set it at the table for Li Wei, giving him a place at the end. Now the table was full. Bilbo himself could only stand on tiptoe behind Thorin to see. Thorin cleared his throat. We must take back Erebor, he said. The main gate is sealed. There is no way in. Balin, the more sensible, disagreed. Gandalf stepped forward and drew a small key and a worn map from his robe. These were given to me by Thrain. I kept them safe for you. Thorin took the key like a relic, clutching it as if it were the heart of his house. Where there is a key, there must be a door, he murmured. Another entrance exists, Gandalf said. Hope stirred among the dwarves. Even if we get in, finding the right path and the treasure will be dangerous, Gandalf added softly. But if we are clever and careful, it can be done. We'll need a burglar, someone said. All eyes turned to Bilbo. Bilbo had never stolen a thing in his life. At first, he tried to refuse politely, and then the dwarves began to question and tease him until the matter swelled into open clamoring. Gandalf stood up. He spoke once, and a weight fell across the room. The dwarves went quiet as if their throats had been closed. Only Thorin and Li Wei were unmoved. Thorin because he was a king in his way, Li Wei because he found Gandalf's display entertaining. Gandalf's single command settled matters. Give him the contract. Bilbo took up the long parchment with shaking hands and read. 1/15, very fair. The dwarves huffed triumphantly. Then, after the paper and a few theatrical shoves from impish dwarves to scare him, Bilbo, accustomed to hearth and comfort, fainted right off his stool. Later, in the sitting room, Gandalf crouched at Bilbo's side. I can't promise you'll come back, he said. If you do, everything will be different. Bilbo thought of Gandalf's voice, then of the thrilling stories Li Wei had brought when he'd visited before. He hesitated, swallowed hard, and shook his head. No, I can't sign. Outside, the dwarves argued under the eaves. Li Wei seems reliable, one admitted, but the burglar, another sighed. Everything's gone wrong. Thorin would have none of it. He rose and walked among them, voice carrying. You are stronger than any army because you answered my call. Loyalty and courage are worth more than all the swords in the Iron Hills. Gandalf watched them, then leaned toward Li Wei. You can face that dragon, can't you? He asked quietly. Li Wei shrugged. I haven't seen the dragon, so I don't know, but if it becomes necessary, I'll try. Gandalf paused, then told Balin, leave a copy of the contract at Bag End. The next morning, the company crossed the Shire. Li Wei held his horse until the slow dwarf ponies were out of sight. He didn't want to bolt ahead and lose the others. The dwarves stared at his mount the entire way. Its armor gleamed. Is that studded with gems? Someone asked at last. It's strong, Li Wei allowed. Good for battle. May I touch it? Another asked. Li Wei laughed. Be my guest. Goodness, how much mining would you have to do to outfit a horse like this? One sighed. They had not long to admire it. A breathless figure came cantering up the road, Bilbo clutching the signed paper. Many groaned, a few whistled. Welcome, Mr. Baggins, to Thorin Oakenshield's expedition, one called. Bilbo rode between Gandalf and Li Wei, their voices easy as they walked. The dwarves had been betting whether he would join. Most wagered you wouldn't. Some said you would. Gandalf said. What did you think? Bilbo asked. Gandalf flicked a hand and caught a small pouch of silver coins that had sailed his way. He tucked it away with a chuckle. Another pouch flew over, and Li Wei caught it as easily as if it were a tossed stone. I'll be glad to have the name Bilbo in the story I tell when this is over, Bilbo said, his grin small and proud. Li Wei looked at him and smiled. To be part of a story, that's a fine feeling. Chapter 51, Fortification on the Roadside. Home behind, the world ahead, Bilbo thought as he stepped out of the Shire for the first time. That first night, he could not sleep. He lay down briefly, then rose again. Gandalf and Li Wei were awake too, one leaning against a rock, smoking his pipe, the other standing on a rise, scanning the dark. Roar. Strange calls and commotions echoed through the mountain valleys, spreading unease. What's that? Bilbo asked, puzzled. He had never seen an orc and had no idea what one sounded like. The noise woke several of the dwarves, including Thorin. Those are orcs, Fili said. A vicious breed. From the sound of it, there are at least dozens. They lurk everywhere in these wilds and like to strike while people sleep, taking lives quietly, Balin added, recounting old battles and even the incident that earned Thorin the name Oakenshield. Bilbo grew flustered at the thought of orcs everywhere. Gandalf, still smoking, glanced once at Li Wei, who looked into the distance and shook his head softly. In the old days, orcs truly were everywhere in those lands. Now it was less certain, but orcs were nearby enough to make them uneasy. In the shadowy depths of a dark wood, a band of orc scouts had indeed spotted the camp where the bonfire burned. Tell the master, dwarf scum found, the squad leader ordered. Some orcs kept tracking while others hurried back to report. Boom! Heavy rain began without warning. The next morning they rode on through the rain. Say, Mr. Gandalf, can you make this rain stop? One of the dwarves asked. It will stop when it stops raining, Gandalf answered with a twinkle of rhetoric. If you want to change the weather, you'd best find another wizard. Are there others? Bilbo asked, curious. Other wizards? Yes. Gandalf looked at Li Wei, hesitated, and continued. There are 5 of us in all. Saruman the White, Radagast the Brown, and 2 blue wizards, besides myself. He looked at Li Wei again. Li Wei met his gaze and said nothing. Bilbo noticed the exchange and peered in that direction. Li Wei only shrugged. Gandalf let the subject drop and returned to familiar ground, speaking of Radagast. He mentioned Radagast because, after seeing Li Wei's alchemy table earlier, the idea of a wizard brewer came to mind. Radagast was a nature-loving sort whose potions were mostly for helping small beasts. He lived in the woods and treated all life with care, except for truly evil things born of darkness like wargs and the giant spiders of the Black Forest. The rain eased, and after a short rest, the company pressed on. They crossed Bree, left the last human settlement behind, passed Weathertop, and headed east. Then Gandalf suddenly pointed. Ah, there, that's Li Wei's territory, the roadside fort. Territory? Is Li Wei a lord? One of the dwarves asked, surprised. Did that make him like Thorin, a lord who led his own band? In a manner of speaking, Gandalf said, evasive, not an ordinary lord. Are we near your home, Li Wei? Bilbo asked eagerly. He had seen Li Wei often, but had never been to his place. Yes, Li Wei said. My domain lies not far from the main road. May we visit? Bilbo asked. "You are welcome." Liwei nodded. Gandalf, who rode at the front, added, "If Liwei invites us, I have no objection." The dwarves, long curious about this strange companion, became lively. Thorin, however, had yet to speak. In the end, though, his decision was simple. "Since the lord of the place invites us, I have no objection," he said. "If you ever come to dwarf lands, you will be welcome," he told Liwei. The dwarves were pleased at the prospect of rest. Bilbo was delighted at the prospect of seeing Liwei's home. Gandalf moved ahead to lead the way. A little while later, the company stood before the city gate and gaped up at a wall that stretched away in both directions, tall and endless. "This is Liwei's territory," one dwarf breathed. "I've never heard of a city so large here," another said. "When was it built? Why haven't we heard of it?" "It's a miracle," someone else whispered. "More magnificent than any human city I've seen." The White City had not yet been seen by these travelers. "But how do we get in?" one of the dwarves asked. "Hey, your lord's come back. Open the gate," a dwarf called up to the silent wall. "No need to shout," Gandalf told him. "There is no one on the battlements." He walked to the iron gate and waited. The gate was odd, no visible lock, yet it would not budge. It must have been held by some enchantment. Click. Liwei stepped forward, pulled a lever, and the iron gate swung open. "Welcome to my territory," he said. "We can rest here a few days. Supplies are plentiful." They brought in baggage and horses, and the dwarves wandered the streets in awe of the craftsmanship. "Whoever designed this place has peculiar tastes. Everything is square," someone observed. "I like it," another answered. The buildings were angular and sturdy, pleasing to dwarven eyes. "What's that?" Someone pointed at a patrolling iron golem. Gandalf stopped a dwarf from touching it and explained, "Those are city guard golems made by Liwei. They handle the security. I wouldn't test their strength lightly. One of those could take on 10 orcs." Maybe even 10 dwarves," someone muttered. "Really?" That boast was cut short when an iron golem clanked over. The dwarves shrank back, suddenly unsure. "Oh no, no trouble. We are guests of your master." The golem, to everyone's surprise, gently produced a small red flower and handed it to Balin, who stood foremost. The old warrior, beard white as the winter, accepted the flower with a bow. "Thank you," he said politely. "They're quite friendly," Balin added, as if he had not moments before been the loudest among them. Another golem ambled up and handed a little red flower to a different dwarf, who received it with a nod. "Come inside. Don't stand about in the rain," Liwei called. "I've prepared a hearty meal. Come in and eat first." While the dwarves still marveled at their floral reception, Liwei had already laid out a large table piled with food. Bilbo, who had been dazed by the city's wonders, snapped back to life at the scent of the feast. "Wait for me," he cried. Food cooked by Liwei himself was not to be missed. Acknowledgements and notes. Thanks to my dearest for the 1,000-point reward, Smoking Alaska for 500 points, Askai 1030 for 1,000 points, Book Mountain Fellow Taoist for 1,500 points, MWPTUD for 500 points, AA162133725 for 100 points, and thanks to all friends for your votes and support. Regarding some questions readers often ask. 1. Is there too little original plot? Will the book be short? Don't worry, both Middle-earth and the main character's possibilities are vast. The lore of Middle-earth has been built up for many years, but there is still room for expansion. There is plenty to write about. Number 2. Why doesn't Liwei admit to being a wizard? The status of wizard in Middle-earth is special. The title usually refers to the Maiar sent to Middle-earth to guide its peoples, the guardians of the world. Only 5 such Maiar wizards were sent, and they know one another. Simply knowing a few spells does not make someone one of them. The matter is delicate to define, and it's not something anyone can claim falsely. Thank you again for all your support. Chapter 52, Argument, Hiccup. At the castle dining table, Bombur let out a hiccup, rolled his eyes, and promptly fell asleep in his chair, snoring loudly. "Oh," Gandalf shook his head. "Who's going to carry him inside? I told him not to eat so much." Old Balin patted his round belly. "Forgive me, Gandalf. I've never tasted such food. Everything here is splendid, beautiful views, delicious dishes. It's only a shame there's no wine. If I'd known there would be a feast like this, I'd gladly have spent every silver coin on a few barrels of good wine in the town we passed," someone replied with a grin. Around the table, the dwarves were stuffed and content. Burps punctuated the conversation. Thorin ate more slowly than the others, savoring each bite, but his fork never stopped moving. Noticing Gandalf watching him, he paused, cleared his throat twice, and said, "I must say, these dishes are commendable. Many of the cooking methods are new to me." Then, inclining his head toward Li Wei, he added, "Thank you for your hospitality." Seeing Li Wei's fortified domain and the manner in which he received them, the dwarves' impression of him shifted. He was no mere wandering knight. He had the bearing of a lord who could raise people to his banner. The territory seemed sparsely populated, but with a leader like this, one call could summon many followers. There was also a hint of power about him, small miracles that might be called magic. When a curious dwarf asked, Li Wei didn't deny it. The dwarves were shrewd. They were impressed, not foolish. "Eat as much as you like," Li Wei waved them off. "Don't bother saving any for me." Dwarves were second only to hobbits in appetite. They ate, filled themselves, and still debated carrying away sacks of food. Li Wei's reserves, however, were enormous. He hardly felt them diminish. "These are the dried provisions I prepared," he said. The dwarves looked at the mountain of dried meats, fruits, and hard breads and laughed. "You call this dried food?" one muttered after biting a piece of dried meat. "I could live on this forever." The party spent the afternoon exploring Li Wei's large castle. When they tired, they each found a room and slept. For once, there were no signs of orcs. The terrible howls that had haunted their nights in the wild were absent, and everyone slept without keeping watch. On the top floor, Gandalf stood by a window, lighting his pipe from the ring of fire and smoking in silence, his eyes distant. "The pattern of Middle-earth may be changing," he murmured. Wizards and some powerful elves possessed a limited foresight. They could glimpse possible futures. Li Wei approached and sat behind Gandalf, biting into an apple and tossing one to the wizard. Gandalf wiped it on his robe, took a bite, and nodded appreciatively. "I suppose it's time for sleep," he said. "The beds here have something about them. Once you lie down, you want to sleep until morning." "What do you think of the plan?" Li Wei asked. Gandalf considered a moment. "I believe it will succeed," he said finally. "I hope so." Morning came quickly. Replenished, the dwarves packed their things and the dried provisions Li Wei had supplied and set off eastward. They had become friendly with him over the meal. Several walked beside him and chatted. "When you come to our home, you'll see true dwarf hospitality. Strong ale, great joints of meat, feasts and songs, hearths that warm you to the bone. You won't regret it." "I hope to see it," Li Wei replied. "I'll come if I can." Soon they reached a familiar landmark to Li Wei, the last bridge. Ancient as the First Age, it had been kept passable through Rivendell's care long after its builders were gone. Beyond the bridge, they found ruins, smashed houses, scattered belongings, but no people. "We'll stop here for the night," Thorin ordered. Li Wei opened his map and slapped his forehead. He realized why he hadn't found this place before. When he'd been to the Troll Forest hunting treasure, he'd entered from the west and cut east. The expedition, however, had approached from the south edge of the forest. Gandalf frowned at the ruined homes. Something felt wrong. Where had the farmers gone? Why had the houses been destroyed? "We could go to Rivendell," Gandalf suggested. "I told you I won't set foot near there," Thorin said, stepping forward and dismissing the idea. "Why not? The elves could help. Food, shelter, counsel." They helped Li Wei. Thorin shot Li Wei a glance, then turned back to Gandalf. "Maybe that's true, but I do not want advice from elves who stood idly by and did nothing." The reply was sharper than Gandalf expected. Voices rose, tempers flared. "I gave you the map and the key so you'd have them when you need them, not so you could cling to old grievances," Gandalf said. Thorin's eyes flashed. "I don't think those were things you had any right to hold on to." Those words cut Gandalf to the quick. "I brought you the map and the key out of goodwill," he said, incredulous. "And now you blame me for it." Gandalf shook his head, offended, and turned away. "Gandalf, where are you going?" Bilbo asked. "To be near the only person within 10 miles who still has common sense, myself," Gandalf snapped, then added under his breath. "I've had enough of dwarves today." He stopped, then called back. "Li Wei, come with me." "All right," Li Wei answered. He glanced at Bilbo in a way that told him not to worry, rose, and followed the angry wizard away. Bilbo hesitated, suddenly feeling awkward with their friend gone. Thorin paid no heed to the departure. He simply issued orders. Bomber, get a fire going and prepare the evening meal. The dwarves set about their tasks, the argument left hanging in the cooling air between the ruined houses and the quiet bridge. Chapter 53, Famous Attractions. Meanwhile, the two walked for a long time. When Gandalf had calmed somewhat, he turned to Leeway. Whether the dwarves agree or not, we must go to Rivendell. Only Elrond can read the secret script on that map. We can't finish this quest on our own. We'll need the elves, Leeway agreed. Leeway, when the time comes, I hope you'll help persuade them, by whatever means necessary. All right, if it's needed, I will, Leeway said readily. But where are we going now? Aren't we supposed to be going back? It was already getting dark. Gandalf was silent for a moment, and then answered, I don't want to face the dwarves just yet. You go back first. I'll scout ahead a little, and then come back. Very well. Leeway, still sulking, turned and headed back. Near the battered house, Bilbo was carrying 2 bowls, ready to bring soup to Kili and Fili. When he reached them, the 2 dwarves stood motionless, unsettled. What's wrong? Bilbo asked. We're missing 2 horses, Kili said. There should be 17, but there are only 15. Of those, 15 were riding horses, and 2 were pack horses. Fili frowned. Should we tell Thorin? Not yet, Kili replied. We don't want to worry him. We're missing Leeway's horse, too. It looked a bit dazed last night, Fili added. Both of them had pounding heads. Losing those horses was no small matter. They couldn't replace the lost supplies. As the expedition's burglar, Kili said to Bilbo, you should help us look into it. Bilbo set the bowls down and scanned the scene. Someone had dragged great trees from the ground, huge roots ripped free from the soil. The marks terrified him. What could uproot trees like that? Agreed, Bilbo said. Kili then noticed a light in the distance. Wait, there's a fire over there. What is it? Bilbo asked. Mountain trolls, Kili answered grimly. Time for you to play your part, Mr. Baggins. Those trolls are clumsy and stupid. You're small. They won't notice you. Me? No, Bilbo protested. We'll watch from behind, Fili reassured him, and before Bilbo could finish, a hand shoved him out of the bushes. All right, he muttered and steeled himself. He had to try. Go get help, Kili ordered, and the 2 ran to gather the others. They hated having to worry their Uncle Thorin, but these monsters were beyond them. Bilbo crept forward, but a troll soon spotted him and seized him in a huge hand. Are any of your companions nearby? The creature demanded. No, Bilbo lied. Liar, the troll snarled. No, I said no. Even in danger, Bilbo refused to betray his friends. Kili could not bear to see him hurt. He charged, sword raised. Let him go! Charge! Thorin roared. The dwarves sprang out in a tight, coordinated line, roaring as they closed. In a blur of axes and hammers, they struck again and again. Their teamwork, years of fighting together, showed. Coordinated, heavy, relentless. Still, the troll's skin was like rock. A hammer blow that would crush a man merely knocked out a few teeth on one troll. The dwarves could cut through some flesh and make their foes howl, but it was almost impossible to land a killing blow. Despite that, the dwarves steadily gained the upper hand. Then 2 trolls grabbed Bilbo's arms. Drop your weapons, or we'll tear him apart. All eyes turned to Thorin. He looked at Bilbo, eyes wide and terrified, and without hesitation let his weapon clatter to the ground. Better to risk 13 dwarves than lose the Hobbit. The trolls liked fresh meat. They usually waited to kill until they were ready to eat. The dwarves were bound and forced to watch as water bubbled in a cauldron. We need to hurry. Dawn will come, and I don't want to be turned to stone, one troll said casually, as if to rub it in. That mention of sunrise froze Bilbo. He stepped forward, buying time. No, you don't cook a dwarf that way. First you have to skin them, he blurted. A racket of outrage erupted. What did you say, little hobbit? Wait till I get... Thorin silenced the shouting dwarf with a kick. Bilbo fumbled for more time, racking his brains for anything that might delay the trolls. Then someone appeared on a nearby boulder, a figure in dark armor. He held up a finger for silence, then sprang down. With a single precise strike, his blade found a troll's throat. The hard hide that had repelled the dwarves split open like paper, and dark blood spurted. Flames sprung along the cut, and the troll rolled on the ground, screaming as it burned. They have companions! Another troll bellowed and charged. Li Wei struck again, setting a second troll alight. One of the trolls, however, remained unscathed. Its fist, larger than a dwarf, swung through the air toward Li Wei. "Behind you!" Thorin shouted, but Li Wei barely smiled, raised a hand, and stopped the punch with a flat palm. He didn't budge. The netherite alloy of his armor took the shock. The dwarves stared, stunned. That blow would have flattened anyone else. Li Wei blocked it with a single hand, parried with his sword, and flowed from move to move, taking on 3 trolls at once. He seemed always a step ahead, as if he could see their attacks before they came. Though he could have simply let his armor absorb the hits, his instincts made him dance and strike, showing off every skill he had. One troll spat a curse and then, unnerved, backed away 2 steps. Its eyes widened in recognition of a name whispered in their old campfire stories: the wealth-swallowing ghost, a creature that could never be hit, that hunted lone trolls to devour them and steal their hoards. The thought of such a thing sent shivers through the superstitious beast. You're the wealth-swallowing ghost," the retreating troll screamed, panic in its voice. The bound dwarves exchanged puzzled looks. "So that's what they call me," Li Wei said with a casual flick of blood from his longsword and a small smile that looked to the trolls like a scythe. "Run," one of them began, but before the trolls could flee, a staff slammed down on a nearby rock. The boulder split. Sunlight poured through the gap. "Ah!" The 3 trolls froze mid-motion, then, with a crack, turned to stone. "Gandalf," Bilbo cried. Gandalf looked down at the stony figures and then at the crowd. "Oh, it seems I didn't arrive quite in time," he said dryly. "But the problem's solved now." Chapter 54, Pursuit. "Old Gandalf, why are you stealing the kills when everyone else is barely standing?" Li Wei sheathed his sword with a faint smile and greeted the wizard. "You've arrived just in time." "A wizard is never late. He arrives precisely when he means," Gandalf replied with a grin, tapping the 3 ogre statues, frozen in mid-flee, with his staff as if approving his handiwork. "Luckily, none of them lost a limb." "That's thanks to your burglar and to Li Wei," Thorin said as he approached, as if their earlier quarrel had never happened. "These ogres must have wandered down from the Etten moors." Gandalf glanced at the black blood on Li Wei's blade and frowned. "That's not a good sign." The Etten moors bordered Angmar and the Misty Mountains, a dark region where ogres were known to roam. "The last time they came this far was when evil held sway," Gandalf muttered, thinking of the old days when Sauron still cast a long shadow. Li Wei murmured something under his breath in a way only Gandalf understood. It left the others puzzled. If Sauron had been cut down, he could reform in other guises. The mere absence of the ring didn't prove he was gone for good. For the moment, Gandalf swallowed his worries and searched the surrounding ground. Ogres do not hunt in daylight unless they have shelter nearby. There must be a cave. Li Wei was already halfway over a small rise when he shouted, "Here!" and found an entrance thick with flies and the stench of rot. They went in, torches held high. "What is that smell?" several dwarves asked, pinching their noses. Some even coughed. Farther in, piled against a wall, lay chests of jewelry and trinkets, and coins glittered like a small mound beneath the torchlight. "We're rich," someone breathed. Dwarves grabbed shovels and began to hide what they could not carry. In a dusty corner, Thorin picked up 2 paired swords and examined them with growing astonishment. An ogre could not have forged these. "Nor could any human smith," Gandalf said. He brushed dust off one of the blades and studied it carefully. "These come from Gondolin, high elven work of the First Age." Thorin quickly set the blade aside with a certain reverence and a touch of disgust at having handled such craft. Li Wei recognized the names at once: Glamdring and Orcrist, famed blades that had cut down countless orcs in ages past. Gandalf handed one to Li Wei without hesitation. Thorin passed the other. Li Wei turned them over in his hands. Both felt as formidable as his own ancient sword, first-rate weapons. "If you like them, take one," Gandalf said, reading Li Wei's expression. "A good blade should see use." Li Wei smiled slightly and returned both, drawing his own elven sword. Even in the dim cave, the blade glittered like ice, sharper somehow than the others. These were all superior to any ordinary sword. After stashing the treasure, they prepared to leave. Gandalf scooped up a short elven blade he'd spotted and tucked it into Bilbo's hands with a quiet piece of advice. Courage isn't always measured by when you strike, but when you choose to spare. Something's coming, a shout rang out from outside. Gandalf went to check at once. Bilbo, gripping the short sword, hurried after him. It proved to be neither foe nor wind, but Radagast the Brown, breathless and alarmed. Gandalf, something is terribly wrong in Mirkwood. The giant spiders, there are more than I've seen before. They must be spawn of Ungoliant. Radagast's voice shook. Ungoliant was a dreadful being from the darkness, and even one of her descendants could make Sauron wary. I went to Dol Guldur. It was dreadful, and I found this. He produced a tightly wrapped sword, the very sword of the Witch King of Angmar. Gandalf's face went grave. A sudden warg's howl cut through them. A great wolf lizard leapt toward them and was split by Leeway's blade. More wargs plunged down, only to be cut down in turn. "Warg scouts," someone shouted. "That means an army of orcs is coming." "We should leave now," a dwarf urged. "No, the ponies have bolted," another cried, panic rising. "All except Leeway's." Bilbo sighed at the lost chance, but there was no time for regrets. "I'll draw them away." "I'll pick them off," Radagast said at the same moment as Leeway. They glanced at each other, both surprised by the other's choice. "Those are Gundabad wargs," Gandalf said to Radagast. "They'll catch you." "They look like Ruzgable rabbits in comparison," Radagast muttered. There was no time to argue. Within moments on the open plain, half the wargs were in hot pursuit of Leeway's mount, which darted and turned under his control. Leeway rode down one after another with brutal efficiency. The other half swarmed after Radagast, who, true to form, had mounted a huge, indignant rabbit and was lashing out with a stout staff as the creature thumped and kicked. Gandalf shepherded the dwarves and Bilbo away in another direction, pursued by a band of warg riders led by an orc chieftain. "Forget the wizard on his rabbit. Hold the human back," the chieftain snarled. "Kill the dwarves first." As Radagast's and Leeway's diversions pulled the wargs off, Gandalf's group met increasing pressure from the orc riders, but they managed to keep moving. Hidden behind a boulder, Beaufort peered out, astonishment on his face as he watched Leeway and his horse cut through the wargs. "I don't know how a human like that exists," he whispered to himself. "I've never seen anything like it." "There's a lot you don't know yet. Come on, hurry," Gandalf urged, steering the company toward a concealed entrance and deeper safety. Chapter 55. The Sword Whose Name is Still Unknown. Whoosh! The long sword came down, and another warg burst into flames, howling as it collapsed. Leeway spurred his swift mount, chasing down the scattered orcs to buy time for the dwarves. "Shoot his horse first," the orc chieftain bellowed, and archers in the distance loosed a volley. Even if they could hit a galloping horse, unlikely. The most the arrows would do was draw a little blood. Leeway's saddlebag was stuffed with several stacks of hay. He could afford to stand and let them shoot until they ran out of arrows, and the horse would still be fine. Leeway himself only flickered a few times on the edge of feeling. Ordinary arrows did little to harm him at his level. Hooves stamped as Leeway cut down warg after warg with a single precise stroke. Then, a clear, familiar horn blast echoed across the plain. Rumbling hooves answered it. A troop of Noldor cavalry, clad in silver gray, galloped in and formed their lines before engaging the orcs. The battle quickly became one-sided. The orc chieftain shouted orders that were smothered by the dying cries of his men. "Retreat!" he finally screamed, and he was the first to flee. With that terrible warrior present, the fight had been lost before it began. The orcs could only delay him long enough to kill the dwarves and then make a run for it. Another squad of elven riders arrived as well. There was nothing left to fight. Before long, the orcs on the plain were either dead or fled from sight. Leeway scanned the area but saw neither Gandalf nor the dwarves. He guessed they had taken the hidden path toward Rivendell. After the elves made sure no orcs remained, they reformed, sheathed their weapons, and rode over to him. "It's you again," Elrond said, riding forward. "Since we last met, you have grown stronger," the Lord of Rivendell added. "I have heard many rumors of you lately." "I'm honored," Leeway replied, bowing the slightest nod. "I was wondering why orcs had started roaming here again." Elrond frowned and pondered. "Not because of me this time. It's complicated. They should be arriving at Rivendell soon." "They?" At Rivendell's entrance, near the slender bridge, an elf stepped down the steps and greeted Gandalf. "Mithrandir." Ah, Lindir. I heard you cross the Loudwater, Lindir said in Elvish. Gandalf's face grew serious. I must speak with Lord Elrond. Elrond is not here. Not here? Gandalf looked around. At that moment, a horn sounded at the valley entrance, and cavalry marched across the bridge in orderly formation. Alert! The dwarves formed a protective ring around Bilbo at the center, weapons raised, glaring at the elven riders. Wait, the one at the very back is Leyway? Bilbo pushed through the dwarves and squeezed out. Gandalf, he greeted. Elrond acknowledged him. Lord Elrond, Gandalf said in Elvish. Melon. Friend. Removing his helmet and handing his weapon to Lindir, he chatted briefly with the elf. It's odd that orcs have been drawn here repeatedly, Elrond observed. Last time they came because of a skilled human warrior. Why again now? It should be because of us, Gandalf said. Leeway, who had ridden at the rear, handed his horse over to an elf to be cared for and approached Gandalf and Elrond. So you two know each other, Elrond remarked, looking from Gandalf to Leeway. I was about to say the same. Gandalf only nodded calmly and stepped aside, revealing the dwarves behind him. Welcome, Thorin, son of Thrain, Elrond said courteously. It is not often we meet under such circumstances. Thorin, always awkward at conversation, began in his brusque way. You have the bearing of your grandfather. I knew Thror when he was king under the mountain. Is that so? I don't recall him mentioning you, Elrond replied. Then in Elvish he instructed servants. Light the fires, prepare the wine, and entertain our guests well. Gloin scowled at the foreign tongue and hissed, Is he speaking ill of us? No, Gloin, he's inviting us to a feast, Gandalf said warily. The dwarves grumbled, discussed, and at last agreed. Fine, lead on. The dwarves showed no deference to elven custom. Later, when they sat down, the feast revealed itself to be distinctly elvish, mostly raw leaves and delicate greens. The dwarves' faces fell. This is what they usually eat, one muttered. This is worse than Leeway's rations. No meat at all, just raw leaves. My pony wouldn't touch this, another said, flinging a leaf away in disgust. Can't we ask Leeway to cook? If he cooked, I might even eat vegetables. Keeley, sitting with the others, gave a discreet wink at an elf across the table. Even though I don't much like elves, that one isn't bad-looking. That's not a she-elf. Ha! The dwarves burst into laughter, and Keeley grumped, irritated. At another table, Leeway, Gandalf, Elrond, and Thorin sat together. Elrond inspected Gandalf's and Thorin's swords and spoke of their origins. Orcrist, forged by my kin in the west, may it serve you well. Despite Thorin's earlier rudeness, Elrond bore no grudge. Even if a sword had fallen into dwarf hands, he wished it well. Gandalf suddenly suggested, By the way, Leeway has a fine sword forged in the First Age. Perhaps you would look at his as well? He was impressed by the blade that had felled so many orcs and wargs. Lord Elrond sampled it when I was here last, Leeway said, but he still drew the sword and handed it over. Elrond examined it with unusual seriousness. I can confirm that the workmanship rivals the other blades, Elrond murmured. It seems even sharper now. He held the sword up and noticed a faint, almost imperceptible mist along its edge. It bears some enchantment, something with fire. Leeway added, It feels different than last time. Tempered in battle by fire and blood, it has brightened. Elrond beheld the blade as if entranced. It looked keener, almost touched by something divine. Perhaps soon you should give it a name. A name? Leeway grinned, but then hesitated. His chronic difficulty with naming flared up. He always struggled to christen things. At a nearby table, Bilbo sat quietly, slipping his short sword out beneath the cloth and wondering if perhaps his little blade was some famed weapon. Balin, watching, snorted, No need to ask, lad. If you ask me, that's not a sword so much as a letter opener. Bilbo lowered his head, thoughtful. The evening passed. The wine was excellent, but the dwarves' verdict on the food was unanimous, worse than Leeway's rations. Leeway knew the elves had meat available. They had served him meat on his last visit, but the Rivendell elves could not afford to appear unruffled after their lord had been snubbed. The austere vegetarian spread was a subtle, restrained rebuke to the dwarves' blunt tongues. Night fell. Under the stars, Elrond deciphered the map's secret script for Thorin and Gandalf. Bilbo stood by a fence, lost in the beauty of the valley. Leeway was at the horse trough, explaining to the elf in charge of the beasts that no extra fodder was necessary, while also asking after Agra, the elf who had kindly hosted him before. Li Wei had once invited Agra to visit Roadside Fort. With the elf's sense of time, Agra probably thought Li Wei had only just left, and so hadn't been in a hurry to go. Since Li Wei was back in Rivendell, he planned to give Agra a gift as thanks. Everyone in Rivendell busied themselves with their own affairs. Far away, on Weathertop in the Lonely Lands, the orc chieftain who had fled returned trembling to a pale, broad-shouldered orc. "My lord, we lost them. The dwarves. Elves attacked." "Don't give me excuses." Azog turned slowly. Towering above the chieftain, he demanded the head of the dwarf king. "We were outnumbered, helpless, and there was a terrifying fellow there. I barely escaped," the chieftain stammered. Azog seized him by the throat, lifting him and shouting, his voice like thunder. "You would have been better off dying there." Crack. With a crushing squeeze from Azog's hand, the chieftain's head slumped. He went instantly lifeless and was tossed aside to feed the wargs. "The dwarves will appear sooner or later," Azog snarled. "Spread the word. Bounty on their heads." The orcs howled and mounted their wargs to ride out and search for the dwarves. A scout came forward with a timid report. "My lord, we found a fortress in the eastern wilds, very large and very quiet." Azog's expression froze. He clenched his remaining fist, breathing hard, and hissed with hatred. "Bypass that place." "Yes, my lord." He knew who owned that stronghold. Long ago, 2 orcs had fled its walls, bringing back fearful tales of Roadside Fort, and for years no orc dared approach. In the wake of the events in the Anduin Valley, the orcs' hatred of that person had been etched into their bones, now so deep it had turned to fear. Thanks to Dongdong's study for the 100-point coin reward. Thanks to user 29995519351323 for the 100-point coin reward. Thanks to Shu Xiaokao, who loves reading, for the 500-point coin reward. Thanks to user 2231142328185575 for the 100-point coin reward. Thanks to all my friends who voted and helped correct typos. Thank you for your support. P.S. Today I updated 5,600 words. Rounding up, can it be considered an extra update? It was early morning. Bilbo wandered along the balcony railings, strolling and admiring the view. "A place where elves live," he murmured. As Gandalf had said, when he was a child, Bilbo had once run deep into the forest alone to look for the legendary elves, and had returned late, his feet full of leaves and pebbles. That had been the first spark of his wanderlust. Now that he had truly seen elves, it felt like a small fulfillment of a long-ago wish. He sighed, moved, and then stopped when a broken sword caught his eye. He stood on tiptoe to peer at it. Opposite the sword hung a finely painted mural, a figure in grotesque black armor, a fearsome helmet, a black spiked mace in hand. Most striking was a ring on the figure's finger, the gold gleaming on the mural. It looks a bit like Li Wei, but fiercer," Bilbo said to himself. The armor here did not have the same grace as Li Wei's. He soon pushed the thought aside and returned to enjoying the morning air. Soft footsteps sounded behind him. Elrond's calm voice came as he approached. "Not with your companions?" No, they wouldn't want me either," Bilbo said. Elrond watched the Hobbit with an unreadable expression. "Actually, they all thought you shouldn't have set out on this journey." "Is that so? I've heard that hobbits are very adaptable." "Really?" I also heard they particularly love the comforts of home." Bilbo regarded the Lord of Rivendell for a moment, then added, "I heard asking elves for advice isn't always wise. Their answers are both yes and no." Elrond fell silent. That was a linguistic trap. Any straightforward yes or no from him would only prove Bilbo right. He considered the joke for a few serious seconds, then smiled. What he said next was not joking. "You are most welcome to stay here, if that is your wish." Like the wizards, Elrond could sense, faintly and in fragments, how the future might unfold. He saw that this unassuming hobbit would face hardships he ought not to suffer, hardships born of courage, kindness, and compassion, yet those trials would help preserve the world. After speaking, Elrond turned and left Bilbo to the morning calm. Elsewhere in Rivendell, Lindir approached the Lord with a worried look. "My lord, our cooks are overwhelmed, and the wine is nearly gone. How much longer will they stay?" It had been 2 weeks since the dwarves arrived, and the elves hosting them were exhausted. Elrond only sighed and said, "Keep hosting them for now. We'll discuss supplies later." His patience was remarkable. He could tolerate his domain being trodden and cluttered, at least for a time. As he walked, he came upon a group of dwarves splashing in a clear fountain. Elrond took a slow breath and mentally made a note to consider a no bathing sign. In his long life, he had never seen anything quite like it. Compared to those dwarves, Liyue seemed almost genteel. Back in his study, Elrond took from his cloak a golden apple and turned it over in his hands. It had been a gift from Liyue, beautifully crafted, made of a precious material, and clearly imbued with vitality. It was the sort of treasure that could save lives. Elrond had not yet decided on an appropriate return gift. The apple's presence alone had already raised Rivendell's renown. It had been a marked and welcome offering. On the first day Liyue had arrived, he had gone to see Agra. The elf's life had remained steady over the years. Time moved dull, and even to him, and on seeing Liyue again, Agra's first words had been, "Oh, you're back?" As if Liyue had only stepped out for a moment. "Ah, yes, I'm back," Liyue had answered. "I heard you did a lot over in the Anduin Valley, east of the Misty Mountains." Many elves are curious about a human who could make orcs fear him in such a short time. When they share those rumors, "I can say I know him," Agra replied pleasantly. Liyue felt slightly embarrassed by such easy politeness. "Oh, right. I came to see you about something." He drew out the golden apple and held it out solemnly. "To thank you for your hospitality before, I brought this small gift. I hope you like it." Agra took the apple and regarded it with gentle surprise. In certain desperate moments, this could be a help. "This," Agra hesitated, then shook his head. "It's far too valuable. I only did what I should have done. You needn't give me such a thing. Sometimes your modesty gives me a headache." Liyue pushed the apple forward. "Consider it a token of our friendship." "Friendship, eh?" Agra let the apple rest in his hand. Though elves favored silver that shone like starlight, they did not refuse exquisite craftsmanship. It was plain he admired the gift. "If I were an elf maiden, I might contrive an elf-and-human romance with you." Liyue nearly choked on his own laugh. No, please, give it back." Agra laughed and shook his head. "I'm joking. The gift is indeed precious. If you ever find yourself in trouble, do not stay silent." "I'll remember it," Liyue promised. There was, Liyue thought as he turned to leave, a faint sadness under Agra's words. Elves and humans, elven lives could go on for ages, so long as nothing unexpected cut them short. Human lives were, for the most part, brief. Friendships with short-lived peoples eventually became memories that weighed heavy. Some elves wasted away from sorrow when their hearts could not bear the loss. For Liyue, his own lifespan might be exceptional. Time would tell. "Don't dwell on it too much," he told himself. For now, the apple had pleased Agra, and that was enough. "Hey, don't think so much. Everything's all right now, isn't it?" Liyue murmured to himself and left the matter there. Chapter 57. The White Council. 2 weeks later, on a clear night, the dwarves were holding a boisterous bonfire feast. Roasted meats and vegetables from Liyue's territory filled the air with scent, and the narrow valley of Rivendell rang with laughter and song. It was a rare pocket of life in that quiet place. Liyue had been about to lie down for a nap in the guest room the elves had prepared when old Gandalf pulled him up to go for a walk. Liyue wasn't asleep, and the two of them strolled together through the courtyard. Gandalf never walked without purpose. It was not long before Elrond joined them. They fell into a tense discussion at once. Elrond brought up the matter of the sleeping dragon and chided Gandalf for withholding information. "I called you out for this very reason," Gandalf said hurriedly. "You must trust me. I know what I'm doing." But Elrond saw the future differently. Both could sense possible outcomes, yet those possibilities split into good and ill. "Are you certain?" Elrond asked. "That dragon has lain quiet for 60 years. If your plan fails and it awakens, what then?" "What if it succeeds?" Gandalf countered. "If the dwarves reclaim Erebor," he explained in careful detail why aiding the dwarves could be strategically important. "This is a dangerous gambit, Gandalf." "Doing nothing is just as dangerous," Gandalf replied. "And we have a fallback. If it comes to the worst, Liyue and I will find a way." He stopped and looked at Liyue and Elrond. Liyue said nothing. He did not argue with the old wizard, but offered the necessary show of support. "I have no objections," he said simply. Elrond sighed. "Liyue is strong. I feel it. Even in the First Age, he would have been a mighty warrior, but facing an awakened dragon, no one can claim certainty. The elves have been declining too long. If the dragon flies, we could fight it, but the cost might be catastrophic for our people. We might suffer collapse. Gandalf shrugged. Thorin has the rightful claim to Erebor. What are you afraid of? Elves, said Elrond. Have you forgotten the sickness in Thorin's line? His grandfather went mad, and his father as well. Can you guarantee Thorin Oakenshield won't follow them once he sees the horde? You must remember, the decisions you make affect more than just us. The shape of Middle-earth is not for you or me alone to decide. Elrond's words hung heavy in the night. They reached a flight of steps then, and an elf on a high terrace turned, bathed in a gentle inner light. Lewi's breath caught. She was beautiful, dignified, serene, Lady Galadriel herself, Lady of the Golden Wood. Lady Galadriel, Gandalf greeted with solemn respect. Mithrandir, she replied, and Gandalf bowed. I didn't know Lord Elrond had invited you. Gandalf smiled, glancing at Elrond as if asking the same. From behind, a cold, sardonic voice answered, It was I who invited the lady. Gandalf's smile faded. He turned and inclined his head, less willing this time. Saruman. You've been busy, Gandalf, said Saruman at him before shifting his gaze to Lewi. Why is a mere mortal here? If this is needless, let him return to rest. Our meeting is not for mortals. He is no mere mortal, Gandalf said at once. Much of our plan may depend on Lewi. His power exceeds what you and I imagine and could decide many fortunes. Saruman's expression hardened. He had, in truth, had a faint inkling when he first met Lewi, but he would not yield the point without a fight. Is that so? That remains to be seen. Before things could escalate, Elrond stepped forward and spoke for Lewi. This is Lewi, the foe of the orcs of the Misty Mountains. The title, an advancement from the older Orc Slayer, had replaced the old entry in the Library of Names after Lewi's slaughter of the orc bands in the Misty Mountains. His deeds could be known to any who wished to look. Saruman's objections faltered. Very well, he grumbled. He may remain. Lady Galadriel inclined her head and smiled, inviting Lewi to join them, and he returned her greeting with a bow in an echo of Gandalf's respect. So it was that five stood together in that temporary White Council: Galadriel, Elrond, Saruman, Gandalf, and Lewi. The dragon belongs to no side, Gandalf said, but if it allies with the great enemy Sauron, that would be disaster. The great enemy is vanquished, Saruman sneered. The One Ring is gone and cast into the sea. Your alarms are baseless. Lewi looked at Saruman with a faint smile, but said nothing. Saruman's pride and rivalry with Gandalf shaded his words, yet he still stood, seemingly, with the Free Peoples. Elrond, ever cautious, sided with Saruman in part. We have had 400 years of hard-won peace. We should not risk it lightly. Peace? Gandalf asked. Is it peace? Ogres raid the foothills. Orcs harry the roads. Ask Lewi how many orcs he cuts down on a single march, and you'll see how unsettled things are. He watched the others. But there's something else, something darker influencing events. We can ignore it, but it will not ignore us. As he spoke, Galadriel and Elrond had moved to stand behind Gandalf. There was a purpose to that subtle repositioning. The bearers of the three elven rings could communicate in ways others could not. Galadriel must have been confirming what Gandalf had found. Sure enough, Gandalf drew a small, wicked blade from within his cloak and laid it on the stone table. It was the kind of weapon used by the Nazgul, a Morgul knife. Its wounds brought a creeping withering, a corruption that ordinary healers could not staunch. Only powerful magic or secret arts could slow the slide into shadow. Impossible, Saruman insisted, even when the evidence lay plain before him. Coincidence. He launched into another long exposition, trying to explain away the facts. Gandalf listened until finally he ceased to argue, as if lost for a moment in thought. Saruman waxed verbose while outside. Unseen, dwarves were doing what Gandalf had hoped, packing and slipping away. Gandalf had stilled Saruman with words long enough to give the dwarves time to depart. It was a deliberate delay. Lindir came in then, barely able to hide his relief. Lord Elrond, those dwarves have gone. A grin could not be fully repressed. With the dwarves gone, the meeting broke. The council's working decisions were reached. They would support the dwarves in reclaiming Erebor, and they would send forces to probe Dol Guldur to gather intelligence about the necromancer. As the others dispersed, Lady Galadriel called to Lai Wei and walked slowly toward him. Author's note: thanks to Taoist friend Shushan for the 500 coin reward, to Keiji for 100 coins, to Wei Jie for 100 coins, and to everyone who voted, recommended, or sent monthly support. Thank you for your encouragement. Lately, I've found many readers are drawn more to the main character than to the wider affairs and setting of Middle-earth, so I've been adding extra background and detail in recent chapters. I'll try to keep the story clearer and more focused on the main plot moving forward. Finally, I strongly recommend watching The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit film series, terrific tales that bring much of this world vividly to life. Chapter 58, Front Hall Door. Lady Galadriel. Li Wei inclined his head in greeting, though he did not understand why the Lady of the Golden Wood had sought him out. As she drew nearer, he became aware of a pure, almost sacred light radiating from her, as if it could wash him clean. He lifted his eyes and met her gaze. If his memory served him, her sight was deeper than that of wizards or even most of the elven lords. She could see far and in great detail. The instant he looked up, Galadriel's curiosity was piqued. She reached out with her sight, trying to peer into his future through him, and then she faltered. She could not see anything. "Your future is full of uncertainty," she said after a moment's silence. Li Wei wasn't sure whether to take it as praise or warning and said nothing at first. Even if the deep, long-term fate eluded her, the lady could still perceive nearer possibilities, threads that crossed other lives and hinted at likely outcomes. "Many paths for this quest end badly," she added, "but with you among them, some can yet be made right. I wish you a safe journey, adventurer Li Wei. When this is over, you are welcome to visit Lothlorien. I will look into this with the Mirror of Galadriel when you come." "Thank you for your blessing." "I will," Li Wei said, feeling somewhat dazed as the luminous figure smiled and was gone. "Li Wei," a voice called up from below the elven steps. A gray-robed figure hurried forward, Gandalf, his face drawn with haste. "We must set off quickly. Thorin and the dwarves have already gone on. We won't catch them if we linger." "The elves say they took the high pass. Who can say whether orcs have returned there these last months? If they are ambushed." He did not finish the sentence, but the worry was plain. Though Li Wei had cleared orcs from the high pass earlier, there was no guarantee the place had not been recolonized. "The high pass? I hope they're all right," he said, turning to go fetch his horse. "Wait, I suggest you leave your mount with the elves for now," Gandalf added. "The road we must take will be rough, steep, narrow, and in places it will force us into caves. Horses won't help there." "That makes sense. Leave it here, then." Li Wei handed the reins over. The elves would be better suited to care for a horse than to try to ride it through mountain gullies and caves. "Let's go." They hurried along the route the dwarves had taken, hurrying to catch up. On Thorin's side, the company had only narrowly escaped the play of the stone giants. Thunder and rain had driven them on and left them exhausted. They needed rest desperately. "Hey, entrance!" Feely and Keely, who had been scouting ahead, called. They converged on a flattened cave mouth. "We'll camp here for the night," Thorin said. "No fires. We leave at dawn." "No," Balin interjected. "By the original plan, we should wait until Gandalf and company arrive before we go on." "Plans change," Thorin snapped, but the quarrel was soft. They were all tired. Night settled. Snoring and the rustle of bedding filled the cave. Even the sentries, half asleep, nodded. Bilbo woke first. He looked at the sleeping dwarves, bundled up and exhausted, then quietly packed his few things and picked up the climbing stick he had found earlier. "Where are you going?" Bofer's voice woke with surprise. He sat up at once. "Back to Rivendell?" "No, you can't go. You're one of us now," Bofer pleaded. "No," Bilbo murmured. "I'm not. As Thorin said, I don't belong here. I shouldn't have run away from my home in the first place." "You're homesick," Bofer tried to soothe him. "I understand. But these things, this quest, you don't understand. None of you understand. You are dwarves. You spend your life walking the road, never settled, never a place to rest." Bilbo's voice broke. The truth of his small hearth and warm home pressed in on him. Bofer listened, somber and gentle. "No, you're right, Bilbo. I didn't mean it like that." He had always felt affection for the little burglar. The dwarves may have been rough and stubborn, but they had looked after the Hobbit more than he let on. May all good fortune go with you. I mean it. Beaufort patted Bilbo's shoulder to reassure him. Bilbo startled and was about to say something when Beaufort cut off. Wait, what's that? A faint blue light traced along the haft of the short sword at Bilbo's waist, throwing a peculiar glow across the cave's darkness. The blade, Bilbo's blade, blinked. In the wrong place at the wrong time, the dwarves had a knack for finding danger. The cave they had chosen bore a name the locals knew well: Front Hall Door. It was literally the front hall of an orc village. The creatures that lived in that town were not the brutish, huge orcs of open battle. These were smaller, quicker, more cunning. In the common tongue, they would have been called goblins. Wake up! Be ready! Thorin leapt to his feet, but it was already too late. With a thunderous crack, the floor of Front Hall Door gave way beneath them. The dwarves slid down an opening like a trapdoor, tumbling along a chute and crashing into a broad cavern. Goblins swarmed in from every side, a tide of snarling bodies that surged over them. They fought. Dwarves are fierce and stubborn, and the battle flared wild and hot, but the goblins were many, and soon Thorin and his company were overwhelmed. Chains bit at wrists and ankles. The dwarves were bound and dragged, carried off toward the heart of the town. Only Bilbo was left unseen, crouched on the cave floor with his head hidden in his hands. Bilbo was small, even among hobbits, smaller than a goblin, and his travel-worn clothes blended with the cave's shadow. Hobbits had a peculiar talent for slipping into the background, and until the main force passed, there had been no notice taken of him. When the pressing crowd thinned and Bilbo stood, a lone goblin saw him and gave a sharp cry. In the struggle that followed, Bilbo slipped and fell into a deep pit. He rolled and tumbled out of sight. No one could find him after that. On another slope of the mountains, Leeway and Gandalf paused and looked up. Huge shapes moved on the distant ridgelines, stone giants, towering as tall as cliffs, casting jagged shadows as they hurled enormous rocks at one another like children at play. Leeway stared, awed and wary. These were not creatures of subtle plotting. Their danger lay in sheer size and heedless force. Gandalf, catching his breath, nodded. Bigger than a dragon in brute strength, yes. But they are not clever. They have no concern with the affairs of Middle-earth. Neither Sauron nor the great enemies of old could make them take a side. They are utterly neutral. Mind them not. Only keep moving. They set off again, keeping the distant giants in their sight and the fate of Thorin's company heavy on their minds. Chapter 59. Blocking the door again. They should be waiting for us, Gandalf said at the edge of the misty mountains. It's part of our plan. That's not certain. Leeway looked over the terrain. The place hadn't changed since his last visit. All right, even if they didn't wait for us, after such heavy rain, they must have found somewhere to rest. While they rest, we can catch up. Huh? Gandalf suddenly stopped and glanced at a cave entrance beside the path. This is the front hall gate of Orktown, a gate the goblins set to ambush travelers. Because of it, this road hasn't been used in ages. I once thought of getting a rock giant to block this place, but they're impossible to bargain with, so it never happened, the old, experienced wizard added as he walked a few steps, then crouched and touched the ground. The mechanism here shows signs it was just triggered. Not good. Thorin and the others must have been captured. Leeway's voice tightened. This is bad, Gandalf muttered. Should we go down and rescue them? Leeway stepped forward, tapping the wall and feeling the ground. Don't waste your breath. The goblins of Orktown are clever. The gate can't be opened from the outside. Gandalf stood and said, There's a back entrance we might be able to sneak through. Perhaps we can. Perhaps we can dig in. Leeway pulled out his fully enchanted diamond pickaxe and asked, Point me in a direction. Watch and learn. If I don't dig through their front hall gate, I'm not Leeway. Gandalf stroked his beard and took a deep breath. He had almost forgotten this one's capabilities. This way. Thump, thump, thump. Leeway swung the diamond pickaxe in a blur, and a neat 2-meter-high tunnel shot rapidly through the earth. Leeway dug ahead while Gandalf held a torch behind as a light source. After a while, Gandalf suddenly told him to stop. We should be close. Let me check inside first. He tapped his staff on the ground. A faint, transparent circle of light burst from him and passed through rock and debris, cutting straight into the cave beyond. The light swept over a large number of goblins inside the cavern, but they were oblivious, still going about their business. Gandalf rarely used such wide detection. Wizards who came to Middle-earth had strict limits on how openly they could display divine power before mortals. That restraint often forced Gandalf to rely on sword and staff. But in front of Liyue, the restriction seemed somewhat relaxed, only slightly. If fully unleashed, Gandalf could have leveled the mountain. One must remember that in the ancient War of Wrath, an entire continent was sunk. "They're here, I see them," Gandalf said and pointed. "Dig 50 meters this way, then straight down." Thump, thump, thump. Liyue continued to swing, shattering rock until he reached the spot Gandalf indicated. He cleared another stone, and a burst of light came from below. They were at the center of Orc Town. Liyue poked half his head out and saw a fat, broad-faced orc king sitting on a flat stone, interrogating 13 dwarves who were surrounded and disarmed. Nearby lay a pile of silver tableware and candlesticks stamped with small letters. "Made in Rivendell. Made in Rivendell in the Second Age. What trash. Can't even give it away." The Orc King carelessly tossed aside those antiques, at least 3,000 years old. Goblins could not appreciate elven craftsmanship. The items had been souvenirs some dwarves had taken from Rivendell. Liyue's own auto pickup couldn't compare. The goblins had simply picked them up intact. "Yo, look who I found, Thorin Oakenshield." The Orc King's face split into a wide grin when he recognized Thorin among the prisoners. "I know your head is worth a fortune, dead or alive. Send word to Ezog. Bring the reward." A goblin was sent to deliver the message. As the Orc King prepared to continue tormenting the dwarves, one goblin scooped up a confiscated sword and drew it. The moment it left the ground, he froze in terror, then hurled the blade away. The Orc King glanced down, alarmed, and staggered back, even stepping on a smaller goblin behind him by accident. "It's Biter, the blade that slit thousands of orc throats," he shouted. The surrounding goblins all recoiled, forming a wide circle. None dared approach the sword. Its previous owner had been dead for years, but the weapon's lingering power remained. "You blasted lot," the Orc King raged. "Torture them, whip them, I'll skin them and cut off their heads." Crack! Whips rose. Goblins lashed at the dwarves. Some tackled them, beating and kicking, while others lifted bone blades to finish the job. "We should go." Gandalf leapt down first. Even with his enchanted feather falling, Liyue had prepared himself. He'd eaten a golden apple beforehand. "Then I also." Boom! Before Liyue could jump, a dazzling, powerful white light erupted inside the cave. A violent gust of wind radiated outward, centered on Gandalf. Debris flew, and a swarm of goblins were hurled backward like leaves in a typhoon, falling into a deep chasm. Even the Orc King, sitting on his heavy throne of metal and wood, was knocked aside. The throne was shattered and his rotund body rolled on the floor with painful cries. When the white light faded, only Gandalf stood. The nearby goblins had been swept away, and the ones farther off lay prostrate, hiding. Even the Orc King was down. Thorin opened his eyes. "Gandalf." The wizard drew his sword, Glamdring, and the ring of fire on his hand glowed faintly. "Take up your weapons. Fight!" Hope flared. The dwarves cleared away the goblins near them, grabbed their arms, and followed Gandalf, breaking through. A group of goblins pursued. After the initial shock, the goblins reacted, pouring in from every side. No matter how powerful you are, can you defeat thousands of attackers with only 14 on your side? The situation quickly turned dire. Then a nightmare-black figure descended from above. With a single sweep of his longsword, he carved out a small vacuum zone. "Ah!" The Orc King stumbled back. "It's him, the fierce human, the bane of orcs." Liyue casually swung his sword and cleaved across a goblin's neck. The creature froze mid-step, eyes wild, its body no longer obeying. Liyue patted its head. It collapsed. The sword was too sharp, capable of dealing far more than a dozen points of damage when required. Against unarmored foes, it often meant instant severing. At the narrow passage entrance, Liyue single-handedly held the way. Each swing sent a cluster of goblins flying, and those bodies smashed into another wave pressing in from behind. This was the power of sweeping edge. Every attack covered an area and struck as many as came. Liyue even began to consider adding the knockback enchantment. If it could be made real, it might be more useful than in the old games. Behind him, the dwarves pressed forward, but kept glancing back. Between Leeway and them, there wasn't a single goblin. He had carved a clear buffer. "Don't look. Go now," Gandalf urged, though he too stole a few glances. The Orc King, protected behind his ranks, stared at the sword in Leeway's hand. The blade chilled him to the bone. He had never seen or heard of such a weapon before, but he would remember it from now on. Leeway caressed the gleaming sword and looked at the hesitant goblins. Then, with cold calm, he said once again, "Come, try to pass me." Translator's note and thanks. Thanks to Dao Yu from Shushan for the 500 coin reward, Wu Shanhe for 100. You say all is empty, yet keep your eyes shut for 100. The Heavenly Emperor is not here for 100. Light of Shiwei for 100. Ming Julie for 100 reading coins. And thanks to everyone who voted, and to the readers who pointed out typos, your support is much appreciated. P.S. Still 5.5k words today, more the merrier. While checking materials, I noticed something. In The Hobbit, both Gandalf and Gollum call the cave-dwelling orcs goblins, while the larger, more warlike orcs outside are called orcs. The work uses both terms for the same species, and either is acceptable in translation. However, from these clues it seems Tolkien may have intended a distinction. The smaller, cunning, treacherous cave-dwellers are goblins, while the larger, year-round marauding war orcs are referred to as orcs. For clarity, I've kept that distinction here. Again, thanks to everyone who helps correct typos. Sometimes I simply can't find them myself, and your corrections improve the reading experience for future readers. Chapter 60, The Ring Black Armor. An aura like a storm sweeping through thousands of soldiers, and an arrogance that was almost otherworldly. These things made the Orc King think of one being, the one who dominated orcs and wargs alike. For a moment, the shadow of that figure seemed to overlay the man before him. No, this couldn't be that one. Although the foe ahead was formidable, he was not on the same level. That presence had not only skill, but something more. "Don't waste time fighting him here. Take another path," the Orc King roared, and with experienced command, he led a large host of orcs away in a noisy rush. "No, you're not leaving," Li Wei shouted as he chased, sword flashing. Inside the caves, he cut down goblins, while beyond a separate tunnel, a tide of goblins pressed on the dwarves and Gandalf. The Orc King found himself squeezed between, sweating as he dodged the brutal strikes of the man behind him and shouted for the goblins ahead to harry the dwarves. The place filled with cries, clashing steel and animal screams. Orktown had become a maelstrom of battle. In a secluded hollow at the bottom of the valley, Bilbo had just come to. He lay dazed among the rocks, and groggy, heard a hoarse voice muttering nearby as it went about its grisly work. "Goblins, little meat, lean meat, need to peel the skin. Better than nothing, precious, better than nothing." Thanks to a hobbit's natural quiet, Bilbo had not been discovered even while he was unconscious. He slipped behind a boulder and watched a small, strange creature smash a goblin's skull with a rock. The goblin's blood and brains splattered. When it died, a small, golden ring slid free and rolled straight to Bilbo's feet. He picked it up and turned it over, struck by how plain and yet perfect it seemed. "Gollum!" the creature whispered, half to itself, half to the ring. Bilbo's heart raced. He shoved the ring into his pocket and peered cautiously around the rock. The creature looked back at the body it had finished off, talking to itself in the dark. Bilbo drew his small sword, trembling but trying to sound firm. "Step back! Keep away from me!" "Gollum," the creature croaked at the sight of the elvish blade. "Elvish sword, not an elf, not an orc. What are you, precious? What are you?" "I'm Bilbo Baggins." "Baggins? What's a Baggins? I'm a hobbit from the Shire." Bilbo kept his voice steady. "Now listen, I don't want trouble. Tell me the way out and we'll part. This isn't a game." "This is a game," the creature said lithely. "We likes games, yes we do. Riddles. If you wins, we tells you the way out." Bilbo glanced around. No one else was there. Good heavens, this creature argued with itself like a pair of people. Still, riddles were his forte, he agreed. They sat among the stones and traded riddles. Gollum grew sharper and meaner as the game went on, but Bilbo was cleverer, so clever that Gollum soon found himself stumped and snarling. When Bilbo finally answered the last riddle, he let out a small breath of relief. "You lost," Gollum hissed. "You lost. Now you must show me the way." "No," Bilbo said. "We didn't lose, Gollum." Gollum's face contorted, eyes wild. He pawed at his waist for the ring. Only then did Bilbo remember. He had slid the ring into his pocket. Gollum's panic turned to fury. "Where's my precious? It's lost." "No, no." Bilbo produced his hand behind him and let the ring show at the edge of his palm. "You must have dropped it." Gollum lunged with a scream, reckless and single-minded. Caught off guard, Bilbo was knocked down. The ring flew free once more, twisting in the air, and somehow, whether by chance or some cunning will of its own, it settled onto Bilbo's finger. At that instant, everything changed. Bilbo's body slipped out of sight. The world did not vanish, but his body did. He had become invisible. Gollum's cries turned high and mournful. "He's gone. He's gone toward the exit, precious. He's going." The creature shuffled off in the direction it thought was out, muttering. Ignoring the odd magic that had just occurred, Bilbo, invisible, followed. Every step a mixture of fear and new power. Back in the main cavern, Gandalf led the retreat, staff in one hand, sword in the other, cutting down goblin after goblin. Yet around them, the chase went on, an endless swarm prodded onward by something relentless. The dwarves fought desperately at his flank, while the Orc King plodded through the press behind them, barking orders and trying to herd the goblins into a trap. A black-clad figure, Leeway, plodded like a shadow behind the chaos, leaping and stepping over obstacles he had created in his wake. The Orc King's face, usually all fat and bravado, had gone pale with an uncommon fear. After one long, winding chase, they finally forced the dwarves and Gandalf to a halt in a narrowing tunnel. For a breath, it looked like the pursuing figure had been shaken. "Think you can run from me?" The Orc King sneered, facing Gandalf. He swung his heavy skull scepter with crushing force. Gandalf tried to parry, but his sword was a blade, not a bludgeon. The scepter's weight smashed the weapon from his hand. The sword clattered away into the gloom, and Gandalf staggered, nearly taken to his knees. The Orc King roared with triumph, sure the victory was his. Gandalf slammed his staff down, and with a twist of motion, the sword that had been knocked away flew through the air as if recalled by some quiet will. It arced and cut a clean, bright line across the Orc King's belly, driving him down to his knees in a spray of dark blood. The sudden reversal left the gathered goblins and orcs in stunned silence. Before Gandalf could press any advantage, a voice cut through the cavern like a blade, and the goblins froze, cowed by it. The black-clad figure they had been fearing had arrived. Leeway stepped onto a ledge above them, the makeshift stones he had used to climb collapsing behind him. He slid his stones away, drew his long sword, and dropped into the space between Gandalf and the Orc King in one fluid motion. Without hesitation, he launched himself forward. A single, clean stroke of his sword finished what the others had started. The Orc King's life ended in a moment. The cavern echoed with the final, mortal thud, and the tide of pursuit broke as suddenly as it had surged.